Hi, everyone. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you with crime stories that happened all over the world. Before we get to the story, tell me, where did you hear it from? And if you like this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. Rebecca Lynn Foster was born on March 18, 1971, in Portland, Oregon. Rebecca grew up in a peaceful and happy family. During her childhood, she was very close to her younger brother, David. When she was a teenager, Rebecca met Thomas Mitchell, whom she would later marry and start a family. After the wedding, the two settled in a quiet suburb outside of Portland. And soon after, they had a son named Connor and a daughter named Emma. After the birth of their second child, Rebecca stayed home and took care of the children. Meanwhile, Thomas worked as an accountant at a local firm. Thanks to Thomas's stable income and Rebecca's careful budgeting, the family was able to provide comfortably for their children. Therefore, Rebecca was able to take care of the children without having to worry about working extra hours. On October 12, 1998, Rebecca stayed home to take care of the children as usual. Thomas went to work and then met up with colleagues for dinner after work. He called Rebecca from a payphone around 8:30 p.m., but she didn't answer. This worried Thomas because Rebecca always answered the phone, especially when the children were home. He called several times but got no response. Worried about his wife, Thomas called their neighbor, Patricia Chen, and asked her to check on Rebecca. Patricia went to the house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. She looked through the living room window and saw that the television was still on. So she knocked again, but got no response. At this point, she began to worry that something serious might have happened to Rebecca. Instead of going home to call Thomas or the police, Patricia decided to walk to the nearby convenience store to use their phone. After explaining the situation, she asked the store clerk to call the police to check on Rebecca to see if she was okay. When the police arrived at the house, they also got no response to their knocking. They decided to try the door and found it unlocked. Once inside, the police found Rebecca's older child, Connor, lying unconscious on the sofa, clearly traumatized, but still alive. The police quickly called an ambulance and continued to check other rooms in the house. In the children's bedroom, they found the younger child, Emma, lying in her bed, safe and sound. But when they entered the master bedroom, they discovered a horrific scene. Rebecca was lying on the floor, covered in blood. The police immediately determined that she was dead. Her arms were also bound with an electrical cord. Paramedics took Connor to the hospital and began investigating the crime scene. Rebecca's mother arrived at the house, but the police did not reveal any specific details. Instead, they asked her to go to the hospital to care for her grandson. When she woke up at the hospital, she learned of her daughter's death from a nurse. When Thomas arrived at the house, the police quickly discovered something strange. He arrived with visible scratches on his arms and what appeared to be blood-like stains on his jacket. The police asked him to hand over his clothes and answer questions. During this time, the police discovered some interesting signs. They found several blood stains in the bathroom, indicating that the attacker had tried to hide the evidence after the crime. This suggested that the attacker had been in the house for some time to clean up. Forensic experts also discovered some important clues. There were no signs of forced entry, and all the windows and doors except the front door were locked. This suggested that Rebecca had invited the attacker into the house, or that the attacker had a key. Police speculated that the attacker may have threatened to harm Rebecca's children if she screamed or resisted. Therefore, Rebecca may have complied with the attacker's demands, hoping to be spared, but was ultimately murdered. As doctors worked to save Connor, they discovered that he had been drugged with some kind of sedative, most likely mixed into his evening snack. He spent several hours in critical condition at the hospital, and his chances of full recovery were still uncertain. After examining Rebecca's body, medical experts determined that she had suffered severe injuries with 11 stab wounds, most of which were concentrated in the chest and abdomen. They also discovered that she had been sexually assaulted and collected biological samples of the offender from the scene. However, at that time, DNA analysis methods were not widely used in forensic science. Therefore, experts were unable to extract DNA profiles from biological samples. They were only able to determine the killer's blood type, so the sample was sent to the lab for further analysis. The police had noticed suspicious stains on Thomas's jacket early in the investigation and had kept the clothes for examination. His behavior that evening was very suspicious. He had gone out with colleagues after work, but instead of going home when he couldn't reach his wife, he asked a neighbor to check on her. The police had seen similar cases before, where a husband killed his wife and created an alibi by going out with friends. He would then ask someone else to check on his wife, to avoid being the first to discover the body and throw the police off the trail. The police expanded their investigation to see if Thomas might have planned the murder before meeting his colleagues. They also discovered that Thomas had a minor criminal record. After graduating from college, he was arrested for a DUI charge. Thomas was fined and lost his license for 6 months, but otherwise had a clean record. Although Thomas had this incident in his past, the police needed more evidence to charge him. The police also began investigating the neighbor, Patricia Chen, because of signs of suspicion. Patricia had gone to a convenience store instead of calling the police from her own home. The police checked Patricia's car and found suspicious stains on the floor mat. They sent these samples to the lab for analysis. Now investigators wondered if Thomas and Patricia might have worked together to commit the crime. After completing the report, the medical examiner came to an important conclusion. Rebecca's time of death was around 6 p.m. before she was discovered around 9 p.m. The police expanded their investigation to determine the suspect's whereabouts around that time and to find out what they did after the murder. Thomas and Patricia both claimed to be at work at the time, so the police set out to see if their statements were accurate. 2 days after the murder, they received a call from the hospital saying Connor had woken up. The police went to see him in the hope that he would provide important information about what had happened. However, they encountered a major obstacle. The 7-year-old boy's memory was almost completely erased. He only remembered a man with dark hair entering the house while his mother was cooking dinner. Thomas and Patricia both had dark hair, but the police did not rule them out as suspects. They believed that the severe trauma could have made his memory inaccurate. The police received a call from the lab with surprising information. Experts examined the evidence and found that the stain on Patricia's car mat was coffee, and the stain on Thomas's jacket was paint from a work project, not evidence of a crime. In addition, many of Thomas and Patricia's co-workers confirmed that they had been at work all day and did not leave until the evening. Thus, they had no opportunity to go to Rebecca's house and commit the crime. The police requested a lie detector test, and the results showed that neither of them were lying. There was no conclusive evidence. The police had to review the entire case and investigate other suspects who might be familiar to Rebecca's family, because the attacker could have easily entered Rebecca's house. During the investigation, they had conversations with Rebecca's relatives and friends to find out who they thought might have committed the crime. Many of them immediately named the same person, Marcus. Marcus was Rebecca's ex-boyfriend from high school, and her loved ones revealed that she often complained about his behavior. Specifically, according to Rebecca, Marcus openly tried to reconnect with her after her marriage and repeatedly tried to convince her to leave Thomas. Rebecca also said that Marcus often made inappropriate comments about her appearance, especially about her hair and smile. The police also knew that Marcus had a history of illegal drug use and a criminal record for assault from 5 years prior. Therefore, the police began to suspect him and soon found some important clues. They found Marcus's fingerprints matched one in Rebecca's house, as well as a hair that matched his. However, it should be noted that Marcus had visited Rebecca's family a few months earlier when he ran into them at a restaurant. So it is possible that the fingerprints and hair were in the house before the murder occurred. Rebecca's parents also believed that he was the one who killed their daughter. Rebecca's mother specifically remembered one time when Marcus visited Connor at the hospital. When Connor saw Marcus, he had a clear look of fear on his face. These observations suggested that he was afraid of him. However, when asked, Connor could not remember what happened on the day of the murder. After hearing all this information, the police summoned Marcus for questioning. However, he denied any involvement in the murder and said that he was at home watching television at the time. During the questioning, Marcus asked to go to his car because he said he left his wallet there. However, he did not return to the police station. Marcus's mother said that on the day of the murder, Marcus left the house around 5:30 p.m. and returned around 7:30 p.m. This meant that Marcus had a 2-hour window around the time of the murder, enough time for him to commit the crime. However, the police still did not find enough evidence to prove Marcus's involvement in the murder. In a last-ditch effort to find more clues, the police decided to analyze a semen sample taken from Rebecca's body. However, at that time, the technology only allowed for the blood type of the owner of the semen sample to be determined. In addition, the analysis of the samples collected from the case was too small to be tested properly. However, the police still decided to perform the test. The results showed that the blood type of the owner of the semen sample matched Marcus's blood type, but this was not enough to conclude that he was guilty. As a result, the police were unable to arrest him. They continued to search for more evidence, but were unable to prove that Marcus was involved in the case. Rebecca's family believed that Marcus was the killer. In the years that followed, the police continued to revisit the case, hoping to find any new clues. In 2005, 7 years after Rebecca was murdered, they requested a DNA analysis on the remaining semen sample. However, experts were only able to extract a partial DNA profile, which when compared to Marcus's DNA showed that Marcus was among the 3% of the population who could match the profile. He could not be arrested based on this result. The police again called Marcus in for questioning, telling him that the semen from Rebecca's body matched his DNA. Marcus then changed his original statement, saying that Rebecca had been romantically involved with him and that he had actually visited her on the day of the murder. But Marcus insisted that she was still alive when he left. The police were suspicious of Marcus's sudden change in story, because suspects often change their stories when they hear about DNA evidence. In addition, Rebecca had complained about Marcus's attempts to reconnect, feeling uncomfortable around him, so it was unlikely that she would have had a secret relationship with him. But the police knew that they could not convict without a perfect DNA match. The local police reviewed the case and confirmed that a guilty verdict was almost impossible, and the case was put on hold again for many years. In 2008, the police reopened the case and asked for help from forensic scientist Dr. Helen Park. At the time, Dr. Park was doing groundbreaking DNA research. She and her colleagues wanted to know if the offender's DNA might still be on Rebecca's body after the strangulation, and if they could extract that DNA for analysis. To test this, Dr. Park and her team conducted a simulation experiment. They followed the steps the perpetrator took by briefly strangling each other with electrical cord, then taking samples from their hands and necks for analysis. The results showed that even in such a short interaction, there were still enough skin cells to extract and analyze DNA. The police began to focus on the available evidence. When they were unable to re-examine her body, they decided to thoroughly examine all the items related to the case to see if the perpetrator had come into contact with them. They quickly noticed the electrical cord that the killer had used to tie Rebecca's hands, which the police gave to Dr. Park and her colleagues to examine. As they began their work, they noticed that the cord had been stored in a paper bag. This was important because the paper bag allowed air to circulate, preventing moisture buildup and protecting the biological samples. Experts used cotton swabs to collect biological samples from the entire length of the cord. They paid special attention to areas on the cord that still had traces of Rebecca's blood. After analysis, they discovered 2 DNA profiles. The first profile belonged to the victim, Rebecca. The second profile completely matched Marcus's DNA sample. The police finally had evidence that Marcus was the one who tied Rebecca's hands and that he was the killer. 10 years after Rebecca's death, the perpetrator was finally arrested. During questioning, Marcus did not confess, insisting that he had a romantic relationship with Rebecca. The police did not believe him. While awaiting trial, Marcus was detained. A cellmate of Marcus's contacted the police and said that Marcus had confessed to him. According to the friend, Marcus told them the details of the attack and murder. Marcus said that one day he had been drinking heavily and went to Rebecca's house. Once inside, Marcus tried to force Rebecca to run away with him, but she refused and asked him to leave. However, Marcus became aggressive and drugged Connor's snack, causing him to lose consciousness. Marcus assured Rebecca that if she did not comply with his wishes, he would kill her children. Rebecca had no choice but to agree to protect her children. Marcus then tied her up, attacked her, and killed her with many stab wounds. To cover up the crime, Marcus washed the blood off himself in the bathroom and changed into Thomas's spare work clothes before leaving the house. The police forced Marcus to face the truth. This time, Marcus confessed to killing Rebecca. In 2010, he pleaded guilty in court and was sentenced to 35 years in prison. However, he only served 8 years before dying at the age of 47 of a heart attack. Rebecca's husband Thomas remarried in 2012. Rebecca's family, including her parents and children, waited patiently, trusting that the police would find the killer. Although they believed Marcus was the killer, they saw him continue to live freely for years, but there was nothing they could do. The case of Emily Grace Morrison. Emily Grace Morrison was born on February 9, 1992, in Sacramento, California. She was the only child of Robert and Susan Morrison, who affectionately referred to her as their miracle child due to the difficulties they faced in conceiving her. Emily's parents owned a successful local bakery, and the family lived a comfortable life in the suburbs. As a child, Emily was known for being intelligent, creative, and well-behaved. She listened attentively to her parents and excelled in school. She had a particular talent for art and spent much of her free time drawing and painting. By the time she reached middle school, Emily had won several local art competitions, and her teachers frequently praised her work. Emily was also involved in her community. She volunteered at the local animal shelter on weekends and helped her parents at the bakery after school. She had a close group of friends and was known for her kindness and bright smile. In 1999, when Emily was 7 years old, her family welcomed a new member, a golden retriever puppy named Max. Emily and Max became inseparable. She would take him for walks around the neighborhood every day after school, and Max would sleep at the foot of her bed every night. On Saturday, September 23, 2000, Emily finished breakfast with her family. It was a beautiful autumn morning, and the weather was perfect for spending time outdoors. Her best friend, 9-year-old Lily Chen, called to ask if Emily could come over to play. Initially, Susan was hesitant to let Emily go, as she had planned to spend the day doing errands with her daughter. However, Emily persisted, assuring her mother that she would be safe. She promised to take Max with her and to be home before dinner. Eventually, Susan relented and gave her permission to go. As a precaution, Susan reminded Emily to be careful. She gave her $10 for lunch and reminded her to call if she needed anything. Emily expressed her love for her mother, grabbed Max's leash, and left the house at around 10:30 a.m. She was wearing a yellow t-shirt with a cartoon character on it, blue jeans, white sneakers, and a small backpack. Meanwhile, Susan decided to finish some housework before going grocery shopping later that afternoon. Unbeknownst to her, the next few hours would alter her life forever. Emily and Max eagerly walked the familiar route to Lily's house, which was about 8 blocks away. The neighborhood was quiet and safe, with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. Emily knew the route well. She had walked it dozens of times before. To get to Lily's house, Emily needed to pass through Riverside Park, a small community park with a playground, picnic tables, and a walking trail. The park was usually busy on Saturday mornings with families, joggers, and children playing. Emily entered the park at approximately 10:45 a.m. Several witnesses later reported seeing a young girl matching Emily's description, walking through the park with a golden retriever. However, Emily never arrived at Lily's house. At around 11:30 a.m., Lily's mother called the Morrison household to ask if Emily was still coming over. Susan was confused. Emily had left over an hour ago and should have arrived by now. Susan immediately tried calling Emily's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Growing increasingly worried, Susan called her husband Robert at the bakery and explained the situation. Robert closed the bakery early and rushed home. Together, they drove to Lily's house, hoping Emily had simply taken a detour or stopped somewhere along the way. When they confirmed that Emily had never arrived, panic set in. Robert and Susan immediately began retracing Emily's route, driving slowly through the neighborhood and calling her name. They stopped at Riverside Park and searched the playground and walking trails, but there was no sign of Emily or Max. At 12:15 p.m., Susan called 911 to report Emily missing. The police arrived within minutes and began interviewing the family. Officers asked for a detailed description of Emily, what she was wearing, and where she was last seen. Robert provided the police with a recent photo of Emily, a school picture taken just 2 weeks earlier. The police immediately issued an alert and began organizing a search party. Within an hour, dozens of officers, volunteers, and search dogs were combing the area. The police also put out an Amber Alert, describing Emily as a white female, 8 years old, approximately 4 feet 2 inches tall, weighing about 60 pounds, with long brown hair and brown eyes. The alert also mentioned that she was accompanied by a golden retriever named Max. The search for Emily continued throughout the afternoon and into the evening. Police officers went door to door in the neighborhood, asking residents if they had seen anything unusual. Several people reported seeing a young girl with a dog in the park that morning, but no one had witnessed anything suspicious. As darkness fell, the search intensified. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras scanned the area, and divers searched the nearby river. Volunteers distributed flyers with Emily's photo throughout the city, and local news stations broadcast her description every hour. Susan and Robert spent the night at the police station, desperately hoping for news. They reviewed surveillance footage from businesses near the park, but the cameras had not captured Emily's route. The park itself had no surveillance cameras. By the next morning, there were still no leads. The police expanded the search to surrounding counties, and the FBI was brought in to assist with the investigation. The case was now being treated as a possible abduction. On Monday, September 25th, 2 days after Emily's disappearance, a crucial witness came forward. A man named Gerald Martinez, who worked as a landscaper, contacted the police with important information. Gerald explained that on Saturday morning he had been working in a client's yard near Riverside Park. At around 10:50 a.m., he saw a young girl matching Emily's description walking through the park with a golden retriever. He noticed her because she seemed happy and was talking to the dog as they walked. However, what caught his attention was a vehicle that seemed to be following the girl. Gerald described it as a dark blue van, possibly a Ford or Chevrolet, with tinted windows. The van drove slowly past the girl, circled the block, and then returned to the park. Gerald admitted that at the time he didn't think much of it. He assumed the driver was lost or looking for a parking spot. But after seeing Emily's photo on the news, he realized the girl he had seen was the missing child. The police asked Gerald if he had seen the driver or noticed anything else about the van. Unfortunately, he had not seen the driver's face due to the tinted windows. However, he did remember that the van had a dented rear bumper and a sticker on the back window, though he couldn't recall what the sticker depicted. This information was crucial. The police immediately began searching for the van, checking registrations for similar vehicles in the area. On Tuesday, September 26th, 3 days after Emily's disappearance, a breakthrough occurred. A woman named Carol Jenkins was walking her dog in a wooded area about 5 miles from Riverside Park when she heard barking. Following the sound, she discovered Max, Emily's golden retriever, tied to a tree with a rope. Max was dehydrated and distressed, but otherwise unharmed. Carol immediately called the police, and officers arrived within minutes. Max was taken to a veterinarian for examination, and then returned to the Morrison family. The police thoroughly searched the area where Max was found. They discovered a small clearing with evidence of recent activity, tire tracks, cigarette butts, and a child's hair tie that Susan later identified as belonging to Emily. Forensic teams collected all the evidence and sent it to the lab for analysis. The tire tracks were measured and photographed, and experts determined they likely belonged to a van or SUV. The cigarette butts were tested for DNA, and the results would take several days. While forensic teams analyzed the physical evidence, detectives continued reviewing surveillance footage from businesses in the area. On Wednesday, September 27th, they made a significant discovery. A gas station approximately 2 miles from Riverside Park had a security camera that captured the parking lot and part of the adjacent street. At 11:03 a.m. on Saturday, September 23rd, a dark blue van matching Gerald Martinez's description was seen driving past the gas station, heading away from the park. The footage was grainy, but detectives were able to enhance the image. They could make out a partial license plate number, 7JK. They also confirmed that the van had a dented rear bumper and a sticker on the back window. Using this information, the police began searching DMV records for dark blue vans registered in California with license plates containing those characters. The list was extensive, but investigators began narrowing it down by focusing on owners with criminal records. On Thursday, September 28th, 5 days after Emily's disappearance, the police identified a suspect. His name was Vincent Crawley, a 43-year-old man who lived alone in a rural area about 15 miles from Sacramento. Vincent owned a dark blue 1995 Ford Econoline van with a license plate that matched the partial number captured on surveillance footage, 7JKM394. A background check revealed disturbing information about Vincent. He had a criminal record dating back to his 20s, including charges for assault, burglary, and, most concerning, attempted kidnapping in 1989. He had served 6 years in prison for the attempted kidnapping and was released in 1995. The police immediately obtained a search warrant for Vincent's property and residence. On Friday, September 29th, at 6 a.m., a team of officers arrived at Vincent's home. They found the dark blue van parked in the driveway. The van had a dented rear bumper and a faded sticker on the back window depicting a fishing scene. Officers knocked on the door and announced their presence. When there was no answer, they forced entry into the home. The house was cluttered and unkempt, with piles of newspapers, old furniture, and various tools scattered throughout. Vincent was found in the bedroom, still asleep. He was taken into custody without resistance. While Vincent was being transported to the police station, forensic teams began searching the property. In the van, they discovered several concerning items: a child's pink hairbrush, a roll of duct tape, a length of rope similar to the one used to tie Max to the tree, and a pair of child-sized sneakers. They also found dog hair on the floor mats, which was later confirmed to match Max's DNA. In the house, investigators found even more evidence. In the basement, they discovered a small room with a mattress, blankets, and children's clothing. There were also empty food containers and water bottles, suggesting someone had been kept there recently. Most significantly, they found Emily's yellow t-shirt, the one she had been wearing on the day she disappeared, hidden in a closet. At the police station, Vincent Crawley initially refused to speak without a lawyer. However, after several hours, he agreed to answer questions. Detective Sarah Williams led the interrogation. Detective Williams began by informing Vincent that they had found significant evidence in his van and home linking him to Emily's disappearance. She showed him photos of the items they had recovered, including Emily's t-shirt. Vincent remained silent for several minutes, staring at the table. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said quietly. "I just wanted some company. I've been so lonely." Detective Williams pressed him to explain what happened. Vincent admitted that on Saturday morning, September 23rd, he had been driving through the neighborhood when he saw Emily walking through Riverside Park with Max. He said he felt compelled to approach her. Vincent explained that he parked the van near the park and waited for Emily to walk past. When she did, he got out and approached her, pretending that he had lost his own dog and asking if she would help him look for it. Emily, being a kind child, agreed to help. Vincent led Emily away from the main path and toward a more secluded area of the park. Once they were out of sight, he grabbed her and forced her into the van. Max tried to protect Emily, barking and jumping at Vincent, but Vincent managed to push the dog away and close the van door. Vincent drove Emily to his home, where he kept her in the basement room. He provided her with food and water, but did not harm her physically. However, Emily was terrified and cried constantly, begging to go home. On Monday, September 25th, Vincent realized the police were searching for Emily and that the investigation was intensifying. Panicked, he decided he needed to get rid of the evidence. He drove Max to the wooded area and tied him to a tree, hoping the dog would eventually be found and lead police away from his property. Detective Williams then asked the most important question. "Where is Emily now?" Vincent's face darkened. He looked away and said, "I panicked. I didn't know what to do. She kept crying and saying she wanted her mom. I thought if I let her go, she would tell the police everything, and I'd go back to prison." Detective Williams felt her stomach drop. "What did you do, Vincent?" Vincent took a deep breath and confessed. On Wednesday, September 27th, he had driven Emily to a remote area in the Sierra Nevada foothills, about 50 miles from his home. He claimed he had given her food and water, left her near a hiking trail, and driven away, hoping someone would find her. However, detectives did not believe this story. They pressed Vincent for more details, and eventually he broke down. Through tears, he admitted that Emily had died on Tuesday night, September 26th. According to Vincent, Emily had been crying inconsolably and hyperventilating. He claimed he tried to calm her down, but she wouldn't stop. In a moment of panic, he said, he covered her mouth to quiet her, and she stopped breathing. Vincent insisted it was an accident, that he didn't mean to kill her. After Emily died, Vincent panicked. He wrapped her body in a blanket and drove to the Sierra Nevada foothills, where he buried her in a shallow grave near a creek. Following Vincent's confession, he agreed to lead police to the location where he had buried Emily. On Saturday, September 30th, a week after Emily's disappearance, Vincent, accompanied by detectives and forensic teams, drove to the remote area in the foothills. After about an hour of searching, they located the site. Forensic teams carefully excavated the area and recovered Emily's body. She was still wrapped in the blanket Vincent had described. Emily's body was transported to the coroner's office for examination. The autopsy confirmed that Emily had died from asphyxiation, consistent with Vincent's account. There was no evidence of sexual assault, which was a small relief to her family. Robert and Susan Morrison were informed of the discovery that evening. They had held on to hope for an entire week that Emily would be found alive, and the news devastated them. Susan collapsed upon hearing the news, and Robert had to be supported by family members. The community of Sacramento was also heartbroken. Vigils were held throughout the city, and thousands of people came together to mourn Emily's death and support her family. Vincent Crawley was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and several other related charges. His trial began in March 2001, 6 months after Emily's death. During the trial, the prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including the physical evidence found in Vincent's van and home, the surveillance footage, witness testimony from Gerald Martinez, and Vincent's own confession. Vincent's defense attorney argued that Emily's death was accidental and that Vincent did not intend to kill her. However, the prosecution countered that Vincent's actions, kidnapping Emily, holding her captive for 3 days, and then covering up her death, demonstrated a clear disregard for her life. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a verdict, guilty on all counts. In April 2001, Vincent Crawley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom, Robert Morrison shouted, "You took our little girl from us. You destroyed our family." The death of Emily Morrison had a profound impact on her family and community. Robert and Susan struggled to cope with the loss of their only child. They attended grief counseling and found some solace in support groups for parents who had lost children to violence. In 2002, Robert and Susan established the Emily Grace Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to child safety and abduction prevention. The foundation provides educational programs to schools and communities, teaching children how to recognize dangerous situations and adults how to protect their children. Max, Emily's golden retriever, lived with Robert and Susan for many years after Emily's death. The dog seemed to understand the loss and would often sit by Emily's bedroom door. Max passed away in 2012 at the age of 13. Susan Morrison spoke publicly about Emily's case on several occasions, advocating for stronger laws to protect children and stricter monitoring of convicted offenders. She stated, "Emily was a bright, loving child who had her whole life ahead of her. We can't bring her back, but we can honor her memory by making sure other children are safe." Vincent Crawley remains incarcerated at California State Prison. He has shown no remorse for his actions and has been denied parole multiple times. The case of Daniel Cooper and Sarah Hayes. Daniel Cooper was born on June 15, 1978, in Denver, Colorado. He was the eldest of 2 brothers in a middle-class family. Daniel's father worked as an engineer, and his mother was a nurse at the local hospital. From a young age, Daniel was known for being charismatic and outgoing. He excelled in sports, particularly football, and was popular among his peers. During his high school years, Daniel was the quarterback for the varsity football team and was well liked by teachers and students alike. He graduated in 1996 with good grades and received a scholarship to attend the University of Colorado. At university, Daniel studied business management and continued to play football. He was known for his charm and had many friends. In 1999, during his junior year, Daniel met Sarah Hayes at a fraternity party. Sarah was born on November 3rd, 1980 in Boulder, Colorado. She was a bright and ambitious young woman who was studying psychology. Sarah was known for her kindness and intelligence. She came from a close-knit family and had 2 younger sisters whom she adored. Daniel and Sarah quickly became a couple. Their relationship seemed perfect at first. Daniel was attentive and romantic, frequently surprising Sarah with gifts and dates. Sarah's friends and family approved of Daniel, seeing him as a successful and charming young man with a bright future. After graduating from university in 2000, Daniel and Sarah moved in together in a small apartment in Denver. Daniel got a job at a marketing firm while Sarah began working toward her master's degree in psychology. For the first year, their relationship remained strong, and they talked about getting married and starting a family. However, by 2002, things began to change. Daniel's job became increasingly stressful, and he started working long hours. He also began drinking more frequently. Sarah noticed that Daniel's behavior was becoming erratic. He would sometimes come home late at night, drunk and angry. When Sarah confronted him about his drinking, Daniel would become defensive and dismissive. Despite these issues, Sarah loved Daniel and believed that things would improve. She encouraged him to seek help for his drinking, but Daniel refused, insisting that he didn't have a problem. Sarah confided in her close friends about Daniel's behavior, but she remained hopeful that their relationship could be saved. On Friday, March 14th, 2003, Sarah finished her classes at the university and returned home to the apartment she shared with Daniel. It was around 3:30 p.m. She had planned to spend the evening studying for an upcoming exam. Daniel was supposed to be at work, but when Sarah entered the apartment, she found him sitting on the couch, drinking beer. Sarah was surprised to see Daniel home so early. She asked him if everything was okay, and Daniel replied that he had left work early because he wasn't feeling well. Sarah noticed that Daniel had been drinking heavily. There were several empty beer cans on the coffee table. Concerned, Sarah sat down next to Daniel and asked if he wanted to talk about what was bothering him. Daniel initially brushed her off, saying he just wanted to be left alone. However, as the afternoon progressed, Daniel's mood worsened. He became increasingly agitated and started making accusatory remarks towards Sarah. At around 6 p.m., Sarah decided to go to the kitchen to prepare dinner, hoping that cooking would help diffuse the tension. While she was cooking, Daniel followed her into the kitchen and continued to confront her. He accused her of not caring about him and claimed that she was always too busy with school to pay attention to him. Sarah tried to remain calm and reassured Daniel that she did care about him, but Daniel's anger only escalated. He began yelling at her, and Sarah became frightened. She had never seen Daniel this angry before. She told him that she was going to leave and stay with her sister for the night until he calmed down. This statement seemed to enrage Daniel even further. He grabbed Sarah by the arm and told her she wasn't going anywhere. Sarah tried to pull away, but Daniel's grip tightened. She began to panic and screamed for him to let go. What happened next would change everything. Daniel lost control. He struck Sarah across the face, causing her to fall to the floor. Dazed and terrified, Sarah tried to crawl toward the door, but Daniel grabbed her again. In a fit of rage, he continued to attack her, striking her repeatedly. Sarah fought back as hard as she could, screaming and trying to defend herself. However, Daniel was much stronger. The attack lasted several minutes, and by the time Daniel finally stopped, Sarah was unconscious on the kitchen floor, bleeding and severely injured. Realizing what he had done, Daniel panicked. He checked Sarah's pulse and discovered that she was still alive, but barely breathing. Instead of calling for help, Daniel made a decision that would seal his fate. He decided to cover up what he had done. Daniel carried Sarah's body to the bathroom and placed her in the bathtub. He then spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen, scrubbing the blood from the floor and walls. He disposed of his blood-stained clothes in a trash bag and changed into clean clothes. As Daniel was cleaning, Sarah regained consciousness briefly. She was in excruciating pain and could barely move. She tried to call out for help, but her voice was weak. Daniel heard her and returned to the bathroom. Seeing that Sarah was still alive, he made the horrifying decision to finish what he had started. He filled the bathtub with water and held Sarah's head under the water until she stopped breathing. Sarah drowned in her own bathtub. After Sarah was dead, Daniel sat in the apartment for several hours, trying to figure out what to do next. He knew he needed to dispose of her body and create an alibi. At around 11 p.m., Daniel wrapped Sarah's body in a tarp and carried it to his car. He drove to a remote area about 30 miles outside of Denver, near a dense forest. Daniel buried Sarah's body in a shallow grave and covered it with leaves and branches. He then drove back to the apartment and continued cleaning, making sure there was no evidence of what had happened. The next morning, Saturday, March 15th, Daniel called Sarah's younger sister, Jessica, pretending to be worried. He told Jessica that Sarah had not come home the night before and that he was concerned something might have happened to her. Jessica immediately became alarmed and asked if Daniel had called the police. Daniel said he was about to do so. At 10:30 a.m., Daniel called the police to report Sarah missing. He told officers that Sarah had left the apartment the previous evening after an argument and had not returned. He claimed that she had been upset and said she was going to stay with a friend, but he didn't know which friend. The police took Daniel's statement and began investigating Sarah's disappearance. They contacted Sarah's friends and family, asking if anyone had seen or heard from her. No one had. Sarah's phone went straight to voicemail, and there was no activity on her credit cards or bank accounts. As the investigation progressed, detectives became increasingly suspicious of Daniel. His story had several inconsistencies, and his behavior seemed off. When detectives interviewed him again on Sunday, March 16th, Daniel appeared nervous and fidgety. He avoided making eye contact and frequently changed his story about what had happened on Friday night. Detectives also spoke with Sarah's friends, who revealed that Sarah had confided in them about Daniel's drinking and aggressive behavior. One friend, Amanda Porter, told police that Sarah had called her on Thursday, March 13th, expressing concern about Daniel's recent outbursts. Sarah had mentioned that She was considering ending the relationship, but was afraid of how Daniel might react. This information raised red flags for investigators. They decided to search Daniel and Sarah's apartment on Monday, March 17th. Daniel reluctantly gave his consent for the search. During the search, forensic teams discovered trace amounts of blood in the kitchen, despite Daniel's attempts to clean it. The blood was found in the grout between the tiles and under the edge of the refrigerator. They also found blood in the bathroom, on the bathtub drain, and on the bathroom floor. Luminol testing revealed additional blood spatter patterns on the kitchen walls and floor, indicating that a violent attack had taken place. Forensic experts collected samples of the blood and sent them to the lab for DNA analysis. While waiting for the lab results, detectives continued to investigate Daniel's movements on Friday night and Saturday morning. They obtained surveillance footage from a gas station near the remote area where Daniel had disposed of Sarah's body. The footage showed Daniel's car driving past the gas station at 11:47 p.m. on Friday night, heading toward the forest. On Tuesday, March 18th, the lab results came back. The blood found in the apartment matched Sarah's DNA. Confronted with this evidence, detectives brought Daniel in for another round of questioning. Detective Michael Torres led the interrogation. He informed Daniel that they had found Sarah's blood in the apartment and that they had surveillance footage of his car driving toward a remote area on Friday night. He asked Daniel to explain these findings. Daniel initially continued to deny any involvement in Sarah's disappearance. However, as Detective Torres presented more evidence, Daniel's composure began to crack. After several hours of questioning, Daniel finally broke down. Through tears, Daniel confessed to killing Sarah. He explained that he had lost control during an argument on Friday evening and had attacked her. He admitted that after realizing Sarah was still alive, he had drowned her in the bathtub. He then led detectives to the location where he had buried her body. On Wednesday, March 19th, police and forensic teams traveled to the remote forest area. Using Daniel's directions, they located the shallow grave. After carefully excavating the site, they recovered Sarah's body. She was still wrapped in the tarp Daniel had described. Sarah's body was transported to the medical examiner's office for autopsy. The examination confirmed that Sarah had suffered severe blunt force trauma to the head and face, consistent with being beaten. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, as Daniel had confessed. There was also evidence of defensive wounds on Sarah's hands and arms, indicating that she had fought desperately to protect herself. Sarah's family was notified of the discovery on Wednesday evening. Her parents, Michael and Linda Hayes, were devastated. Her younger sisters, Jessica and Emily, were inconsolable. The Hayes family had hoped that Sarah would be found alive, and the confirmation of her death shattered them completely. The community of Denver was shocked by the news. Sarah was well known and well liked, and many people had participated in search efforts over the previous days. Vigils were held in her honor, and hundreds of people came together to mourn her loss. Daniel Cooper was formally charged with first-degree murder on Thursday, March 20th. He was held without bail pending trial. The case received significant media attention, and public outrage was directed at Daniel for his brutal actions. Daniel's trial began in October 2003. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence, including the forensic evidence from the apartment, the surveillance footage, and Daniel's own confession. Medical examiners testified about the extent of Sarah's injuries and the violence of the attack. The defense attempted to argue that Daniel had acted in a moment of passion and that Sarah's death was not premeditated. They claimed that Daniel had been under significant stress from his job and that his drinking had impaired his judgment. However, the prosecution countered that Daniel's decision to drown Sarah after she survived the initial attack and his subsequent efforts to dispose of her body and cover up the crime demonstrated clear intent and consciousness of guilt. Daniel's friends and family testified on his behalf, describing him as a good person who had made a terrible mistake. However, Sarah's friends and family painted a different picture. They testified about Daniel's controlling behavior, his drinking problem, and the fear Sarah had expressed in the weeks leading up to her death. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a verdict. On November 8, 2003, Daniel Cooper was found guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Sarah's mother, Linda Hayes, sobbed openly in the courtroom. Her father, Michael Hayes, held his wife close and stared at Daniel with a mixture of anger and grief. Sarah's sisters sat with their parents, holding hands and crying. Daniel showed little emotion as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He briefly glanced at his own parents, who sat in the back of the courtroom, but said nothing. The death of Sarah Hayes had a lasting impact on everyone who knew her. Her family struggled to cope with the loss of their daughter and sister. Linda Hayes later spoke publicly about Sarah's case, advocating for increased awareness of domestic violence and urging victims to seek help. In 2004, the Hayes family established the Sarah Hayes Memorial Scholarship at the University of Colorado, providing financial assistance to students studying psychology. The scholarship was created to honor Sarah's passion for helping others and her dedication to her education. Sarah's case also prompted discussions about the warning signs of domestic violence and the importance of intervention. Many of Sarah's friends expressed regret that they had not done more to help her when she confided in them about Daniel's behavior. Daniel Cooper remains incarcerated at the Colorado State Penitentiary. He has never expressed remorse for his actions and has refused to participate in any interviews or rehabilitation programs. Sarah Hayes is remembered by her family and friends as a bright, compassionate young woman who had her whole life ahead of her. Her death serves as a tragic reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing the warning signs before it is too late. The case of Jennifer Walsh. Jennifer Marie Walsh was born on April 22, 1981, in Eugene, Oregon. She was the middle child of 3 siblings in the Walsh family. Her father, Patrick Walsh, worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop, while her mother, Catherine Walsh, was a teacher at the elementary school. The Walsh family was well known in their small community and lived in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Jennifer was a bright and energetic child who loved the outdoors. She spent most of her time riding her bicycle, exploring the nearby woods, and playing with her older brother, Michael, and younger sister, Rachel. Teachers at school described Jennifer as curious and talkative, always asking questions and eager to learn. She had a particular interest in animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian when she grew up. During her teenage years, Jennifer remained close with her siblings. Michael, who was 3 years older, was protective of his sisters and often looked out for them. Rachel, who was 2 years younger, looked up to Jennifer, and the two shared a bedroom, staying up late, talking about their dreams and plans for the future. Jennifer attended Cascade High School, where she was a member of the track team and participated in the school newspaper. She had a close group of friends and was known for being loyal and kind. Her best friend, Nicole Stevens, lived just 2 houses down from the Walsh family, and the two girls were inseparable. In the spring of 1997, Jennifer was a junior in high school, just 16 years old. She was doing well in her classes and had recently been accepted into a summer program for students interested in veterinary medicine. Her family was proud of her accomplishments, and Jennifer was excited about her future. On Saturday, May 10th, 1997, Jennifer woke up early and had breakfast with her family. It was a beautiful spring morning, and Jennifer had plans to meet Nicole at the public library to work on a school project. The library was about 1.5 miles from the Walsh home, an easy walk that Jennifer had made countless times before. At around 9:30 a.m., Jennifer said goodbye to her parents and left the house. She was wearing a red hoodie, blue jeans, and white sneakers. She carried a backpack containing her school books, a notebook, and her wallet. Catherine reminded Jennifer to be home by 5 p.m. for dinner, and Jennifer promised she would. Jennifer walked down the familiar tree-lined streets of her neighborhood, heading toward downtown Eugene. Several neighbors later reported seeing Jennifer that morning, walking alone and appearing relaxed and happy. The walk to the library normally took about 20 minutes. Nicole arrived at the library at 10 a.m. and waited for Jennifer in the reading area they usually used. When Jennifer didn't arrive by 10:30 a.m., Nicole tried calling the Walsh house, but no one answered. Nicole assumed that Jennifer had been delayed and continued waiting. By 11 a.m., Jennifer still had not arrived. Nicole called the Walsh house again, and this time Catherine answered. Catherine was surprised to hear that Jennifer had not made it to the library. She told Nicole that Jennifer had left the house over 1.5 hours ago and should have arrived by now. Growing concerned, Catherine called her husband Patrick at the auto shop and explained the situation. Patrick immediately left work and drove home. Together, Catherine and Patrick retraced Jennifer's route to the library, driving slowly and looking for any sign of their daughter. They stopped and asked people on the street if they had seen Jennifer, but no one had. At 11:45 a.m., Patrick and Catherine arrived at the library and met with Nicole. The three of them searched the library and the surrounding area, but Jennifer was nowhere to be found. Patrick then drove to the local police station to report Jennifer missing. The Eugene Police Department took Patrick's report seriously. Given Jennifer's age and the fact that it was unusual for her to not arrive at her destination, officers immediately began investigating. They issued a description of Jennifer and asked patrol officers to be on the lookout for her. Detectives interviewed the Walsh family, Nicole, and several neighbors who had seen Jennifer that morning. One neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Pruitt, reported seeing Jennifer walking past her house at around 9:35 a.m. She said Jennifer had waved to her and seemed in good spirits. Another neighbor, Mr. Harold Chen, said he saw Jennifer at around 9:45 a.m. near the corner of Maple Street and Fifth Avenue, still heading toward downtown. However, after that point, no one reported seeing Jennifer. It was as if she had simply vanished. By the afternoon, the police had organized a search party. Dozens of volunteers, including Jennifer's family, friends, and members of the community, combed the area between the Walsh home and the library. They searched parks, alleyways, and wooded areas, calling Jennifer's name and distributing flyers with her photo. As evening approached and Jennifer had still not been found, the police expanded their search. They brought in search dogs and searched along the nearby Willamette River, fearing that Jennifer might have had an accident and fallen into the water. However, the dogs found no trace of her. Catherine and Patrick spent the night at the police station, desperately hoping for news. Michael and Rachel stayed with their grandmother, both of them frightened and confused about what had happened to their sister. On Sunday, May 11th, the search continued with renewed intensity. Local news stations broadcast Jennifer's photo and description, and the police set up a hotline for tips. The community rallied around the Walsh family, with hundreds of people volunteering to help search for Jennifer. Despite these efforts, there were no significant leads. Jennifer's backpack, wallet, and clothing were never found. There were no witnesses who had seen anything suspicious, and there was no evidence of foul play. On Monday, May 12th, 2 days after Jennifer's disappearance, a jogger named Kevin Barnett was running on a trail in Hendricks Park, a large wooded area about 3 miles from downtown Eugene. At around 7 a.m., Kevin noticed something unusual off the side of the trail. As he approached, he realized with horror that it was a body. Kevin immediately called 911, and police arrived within minutes. The body was that of a young female, partially hidden by bushes and leaves. She was wearing a red hoodie and blue jeans. The police quickly confirmed that the body was Jennifer Walsh. The scene was immediately secured, and forensic teams began their investigation. Jennifer's body showed signs of trauma. Her clothing was torn, and there were visible injuries to her head and neck. The medical examiner was called to the scene to conduct a preliminary examination. Patrick and Catherine were notified of the discovery later that morning. The news devastated them completely. Michael and Rachel were told by their grandmother, and the entire family was consumed by grief. The autopsy was conducted later that day. The medical examiner determined that Jennifer had died from blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. The injuries were consistent with a violent attack. There was also evidence that Jennifer had been sexually assaulted. The medical examiner estimated that Jennifer had been killed on Saturday, May 10th, likely within hours of her disappearance. Forensic experts collected DNA evidence from Jennifer's body and clothing. At the time, DNA analysis was still a relatively new technology in criminal investigations, but the police were hopeful that it would help them identify Jennifer's killer. The investigation into Jennifer's murder intensified. Detectives interviewed everyone who had been in the area on Saturday morning. They reviewed records of known sex offenders living in Eugene and the surrounding areas. They also looked into whether there were any similar cases in other parts of Oregon. One person who drew the attention of investigators was a man named Gary Holt. Gary was a 34-year-old maintenance worker who lived alone in an apartment near Hendricks Park. Neighbors described him as quiet and somewhat odd. He had no criminal record, but several people mentioned that they had seen him walking in the park frequently. Detectives interviewed Gary on May 15th. He told them that he had been at home on Saturday morning and had not seen or heard anything unusual. When asked if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample, Gary agreed without hesitation. His DNA was collected and sent to the lab for analysis. However, when the results came back a few weeks later, Gary's DNA did not match the sample collected from Jennifer's body. He was ruled out as a suspect. The police continued their investigation for months, following up on hundreds of tips and leads. They interviewed dozens of people and conducted extensive searches of the area where Jennifer's body was found. However, despite their efforts, they were unable to identify a suspect. By the end of 1997, the case had gone cold. The police had exhausted all their leads, and there were no new developments. The DNA sample collected from Jennifer's body was stored in the evidence locker, waiting for the day when technology might advance enough to provide new answers. The years passed slowly for the Walsh family. Patrick and Catherine struggled to cope with the loss of their daughter. Michael, who had been preparing to go to college, decided to stay close to home to be with his family. Rachel, who had been only 14 when Jennifer was killed, found it difficult to move on. She often had nightmares and became withdrawn. The Walsh family never gave up hope that Jennifer's killer would be found. Every year on the anniversary of Jennifer's death, they held a vigil in her memory. They also worked with local organizations to raise awareness about violence against women and to support other families who had lost loved ones to violent crime. In 2005, 8 years after Jennifer's murder, the Eugene Police Department reopened the case. Advances in DNA technology had made it possible to extract more information from old evidence. The DNA sample from Jennifer's case was reanalyzed, and a more complete profile was developed. The police entered the DNA profile into CODIS, the National DNA Database, hoping for a match. However, there was no match in the system. The killer, whoever he was, had never been arrested for a crime that required a DNA sample. The case went cold once again. In 2018, 21 years after Jennifer's murder, a new development occurred. The police learned about a revolutionary technique called forensic genealogy, which had been used successfully to solve several high-profile cold cases. This technique involved uploading DNA profiles to public genealogy databases to identify potential relatives of the suspect. Detective Lisa Monroe, who had recently been assigned to the cold case unit, decided to try this approach with Jennifer's case. She worked with a forensic genealogist named Dr. Rebecca Hart to upload the killer's DNA profile to a public genealogy website. Within weeks, Dr. Hart had identified several distant relatives of the suspect. Using genealogical records, she began constructing a family tree, working backward to identify common ancestors. The process was painstaking and required analyzing hundreds of family connections. After several months of work, Dr. Hart narrowed down the list of potential suspects to a single individual, a man named Thomas Keegan. Thomas was 57 years old and lived in Bend, Oregon, about 100 miles southeast of Eugene. He worked as a landscaper and had no criminal record. Detective Monroe began investigating Thomas's background. She discovered that in 1997, Thomas had been living in Eugene. He had worked as a delivery driver for a local florist and would have been in the area around the time of Jennifer's murder. In fact, delivery records showed that Thomas had made several deliveries in the neighborhood near Hendricks Park on the morning of May 10, 1997. This information was significant, but it was not enough to make an arrest. Detective Monroe needed concrete evidence linking Thomas to the crime. She decided to conduct surveillance on Thomas to try to obtain a DNA sample that could be compared to the evidence from Jennifer's case. On September 12, 2018, Detective Monroe and her team followed Thomas to a coffee shop in Bend. After Thomas left the shop, they retrieved the coffee cup he had used and sent it to the lab for DNA analysis. The results came back a week later. The DNA from the coffee cup was a perfect match to the DNA found on Jennifer Walsh's body in 1997. On September 20th, 2018, police arrested Thomas Keegan at his home in Bend. He was charged with the murder and sexual assault of Jennifer Walsh. Thomas appeared shocked and denied any involvement in the crime. The news of the arrest reached the Walsh family immediately. Catherine, who was now 68 years old, broke down in tears when she heard the news. Patrick, who was 71, said he had waited 21 years to hear those words. Michael and Rachel, now both in their 40s, expressed relief that their sister's killer had finally been caught. Thomas Keegan's trial began in April 2019. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, which was overwhelming. They also presented testimony from former co-workers who remembered Thomas's behavior in 1997. One co-worker recalled that Thomas had called in sick on Monday, May 12th, 1997, the day Jennifer's body was discovered. Another co-worker mentioned that Thomas had seemed nervous and distracted in the days following the murder. The prosecution also presented evidence that Thomas had been driving through the area near Hendricks Park on the morning of May 10, 1997, based on his delivery route. They theorized that Thomas had seen Jennifer walking alone, followed her into the park, and attacked her. The defense argued that the DNA evidence, while compelling, did not prove that Thomas had killed Jennifer. They claimed that there could be innocent explanations for how his DNA ended up on her body. They also pointed out that there were no eyewitnesses to the crime and no physical evidence linking Thomas to the murder weapon. However, the jury was not convinced by the defense's arguments. After 3 days of deliberation, they returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Thomas Keegan was convicted of first-degree murder and sexual assault. On May 10, 2019, exactly 22 years after Jennifer's death, Thomas Keegan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Catherine Walsh sobbed and held Patrick's hand. Michael and Rachel sat with their parents, finally feeling a sense of closure after more than 2 decades of waiting. Thomas showed no emotion as he was led out of the courtroom. He has never confessed to the crime and has maintained his innocence despite the overwhelming evidence against him. The resolution of Jennifer's case brought some measure of peace to her family. Catherine and Patrick, now in their 70s, said that while nothing could bring Jennifer back, knowing that her killer was behind bars gave them comfort. They continued to honor Jennifer's memory through the foundation they had established in her name, which provides support to families of victims of violent crime. Jennifer Walsh is remembered as a bright, kind-hearted young woman whose life was tragically cut short. Her case also highlighted the importance of preserving evidence and the power of new technologies in solving cold cases. Thanks to advances in forensic genealogy, justice was finally served, and Jennifer's family was able to find some closure after decades of uncertainty. Thomas Keegan remains incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he will spend the rest of his life. 57. The Case of Amanda Price. Amanda Catherine Price was born on September 7, 1985, in Austin, Texas. She was the youngest of 4 children in the Price family. Her father, Richard Price, was a police officer with the Austin Police Department, and her mother, Diane Price, worked as a librarian at the public library. The Price family lived in a suburban neighborhood and was well respected in the community. Amanda was known from an early age as a gentle and thoughtful child. She loved reading books, drawing, and spending time with her 3 older brothers, Matthew, Jason, and Kyle. The brothers were very protective of their little sister and would often play with her and help her with her homework. Amanda's relationship with her mother was particularly close. Diane would read to Amanda every night before bed, and the two shared a love of literature and storytelling. During her school years, Amanda excelled academically. She was quiet and reserved, but had a small group of close friends. Teachers described her as diligent and creative, always turning in well-written assignments and participating thoughtfully in class discussions. Amanda had a particular talent for writing and often contributed short stories and poems to the school literary magazine. By the time Amanda reached high school, she had developed a passion for journalism. She joined the school newspaper and eventually became the editor during her senior year. Her dream was to become an investigative journalist, inspired in part by her father's work in law enforcement. She wanted to expose injustice and give a voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. In 2003, Amanda graduated from high school with honors and received a scholarship to attend the University of Texas at Austin, where she planned to study journalism. Her family was incredibly proud of her accomplishments. Richard, in particular, was moved to tears during her graduation ceremony, knowing how hard his daughter had worked to achieve her goals. Amanda's first year of college went well. She adjusted to university life, made new friends, and threw herself into her studies. She joined the university newspaper and began writing articles about campus issues. Her professors praised her writing and encouraged her to pursue investigative journalism. In her sophomore year, Amanda began working part-time at a local coffee shop called The Daily Grind to help pay for her expenses. The coffee shop was located near campus and was a popular spot for students. Amanda worked 3 evenings a week from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. and enjoyed the job. She liked talking to customers and found that the tips helped supplement her scholarship money. It was at the Daily Grind that Amanda met a regular customer named Derek Foster. Derek was 28 years old and worked as a software developer at a tech company downtown. He was friendly and charming, always making conversation with Amanda when he came in for coffee. Derek would often stay for hours working on his laptop and occasionally engaging Amanda in discussions about books, movies, and current events. At first, Amanda thought Derek was simply being friendly. However, over time, his attention became more focused. He began asking Amanda personal questions about her life, her family, and her plans for the future. He would compliment her appearance and sometimes wait until her shift ended to walk her to her car. Amanda mentioned Derek to her roommate, Melissa Torres, expressing some discomfort with his behavior. Melissa advised Amanda to be careful and to let their manager know if Derek made her feel unsafe. However, Amanda didn't want to cause trouble and thought that Derek was probably just lonely and harmless. By the fall of 2005, during Amanda's junior year, Derek's behavior had escalated. He began showing up at the coffee shop more frequently, sometimes multiple times a day. He would sit in the corner and watch Amanda work, which made her increasingly uncomfortable. Other employees noticed Derek's behavior and mentioned it to the manager, but no action was taken. One evening in early October, Derek asked Amanda if she would like to go out to dinner with him. Amanda politely declined, explaining that she was focused on her studies and not interested in dating. Derek seemed to take the rejection well, but Amanda noticed that he looked hurt and disappointed. After that incident, Derek's visits to the coffee shop became less frequent. Amanda was relieved, thinking that he had finally moved on. However, she began receiving strange text messages from an unknown number. The messages were vague but unsettling, saying things like, "I'm thinking about you and you look beautiful today." Amanda suspected the messages were from Derek, but had no way to confirm it. On Saturday, October 22nd, 2005, Amanda worked her usual evening shift at the Daily Grind. It had been a busy night, and by the time 10 p.m. arrived, Amanda was exhausted. She said goodbye to her coworkers and walked out to the parking lot, where her car was parked under a streetlight. As Amanda approached her car, she noticed a figure standing near the driver's side door. Her heart raced as she realized it was Derek. He smiled and said he had been waiting to talk to her. Amanda tried to remain calm and asked Derek to move so she could get in her car. Derek apologized for startling her and said he just wanted to explain something. He told Amanda that he had feelings for her and that he couldn't stop thinking about her. He said he understood that she had turned him down before, but he hoped she would reconsider and give him a chance. Amanda firmly told Derek that she was not interested and asked him to leave her alone. She reached for her car door, but Derek grabbed her arm. Amanda pulled away and told him not to touch her. Derek's expression changed from pleading to angry. He accused Amanda of leading him on and said she had been flirting with him all along. Amanda tried to get into her car, but Derek blocked her path. He continued to argue with her, his voice growing louder and more aggressive. Amanda became frightened and considered running back into the coffee shop. But before she could act, Derek grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her against the car. Amanda screamed, but the parking lot was mostly empty, and no one heard her. Derek covered her mouth with his hand and told her to be quiet. He then forced Amanda into the back seat of her own car, got in after her, and locked the doors. What happened next is known only from Derek's eventual confession. For the next several hours, Amanda was held captive in her car. Derek drove to a secluded area on the outskirts of Austin, a dirt road surrounded by woods. He parked the car and turned off the engine. Derek told Amanda that they were going to talk and work things out. He said that if she just gave him a chance, they could be happy together. Amanda, terrified and trapped, tried to reason with Derek. She told him that this was not the way to start a relationship, and that he was scaring her. She begged him to let her go, promising that she wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. Derek seemed to waver. For a moment, Amanda thought he might actually let her go. However, his mood shifted again, and he became angry. He accused Amanda of lying to him and said she was just like all the other women who had rejected him in the past. Derek then attacked Amanda. She fought back with everything she had, scratching his face and trying to push him away. However, Derek was much stronger. The struggle lasted several minutes, and Amanda screamed for help, even though she knew no one was around to hear her. Eventually, Derek strangled Amanda until she stopped moving. Once she was dead, Derek panicked. He realized what he had done and knew he needed to dispose of the body. He drove further into the woods and found a small clearing. He carried Amanda's body out of the car and left it hidden among the trees and brush. Derek then drove Amanda's car back to the city and abandoned it in a parking garage downtown. He wiped down the interior to remove his fingerprints, although in his panic he missed several areas. He then walked home, destroyed his blood-stained clothes, and tried to act as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Sunday, October the 23rd, Amanda's roommate Melissa became concerned when Amanda didn't come home. She tried calling Amanda's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Melissa waited until noon, thinking that perhaps Amanda had stayed with a friend, but when Amanda still hadn't returned or responded to messages, Melissa called Amanda's parents. Richard and Diane Price immediately drove to Austin. They went to the coffee shop where the manager confirmed that Amanda had finished her shift the night before and left around 10 p.m. Richard, using his experience as a police officer, knew that something was seriously wrong. He contacted the Austin Police Department and reported Amanda missing. The police took the report seriously given Richard's background and the unusual circumstances. They began searching for Amanda's car and interviewed Amanda's co-workers, friends, and family. Melissa told investigators about Derek Foster and his obsessive behavior toward Amanda. She provided a description of Derek and mentioned that he was a regular customer at the coffee shop. The police immediately identified Derek as a person of interest. They obtained his address from the coffee shop's customer records, as he had once signed up for a loyalty card. On Monday, October 24th, detectives went to Derek's apartment to question him. Derek answered the door and seemed nervous when he saw the police. The detectives asked him about his relationship with Amanda and when he had last seen her. Derek claimed that he had last seen Amanda at the coffee shop several days earlier and that they were just casual acquaintances. He denied having any romantic interest in her. However, as the detectives continued questioning him, they noticed fresh scratches on Derek's face and neck. When asked about the scratches, Derek said he had been hiking over the weekend and had gotten scratched by branches. The detectives found this explanation suspicious. The detectives asked Derek if he would be willing to come to the station to answer more questions, and Derek agreed. At the station, the questioning became more intense. Detectives confronted Derek with statements from Amanda's co-workers about his obsessive behavior. They also mentioned the text messages Amanda had been receiving. Derek initially continued to deny any involvement in Amanda's disappearance. However, when detectives told him that they were going to search his apartment and his car, Derek's composure began to crack. He asked for a lawyer, and the interview was terminated. While Derek consulted with his attorney, the police obtained a search warrant for his apartment and vehicle. On Tuesday, October 25th, forensic teams executed the search warrant. In Derek's apartment, they found several items of interest. A notebook containing detailed entries about Amanda, including descriptions of her work schedule, her car, and where she lived. They also found printed photos of Amanda that appeared to have been taken without her knowledge, possibly from social media. In Derek's car, forensic experts found traces of blood on the passenger seat and dashboard. They also found several strands of hair that appeared to match Amanda's description. The evidence was sent to the lab for DNA analysis. Meanwhile, the search for Amanda continued. Police organized search parties and used helicopters to scan the areas around Austin. On Wednesday, October 26th, police received a tip from a hunter who had been in the woods on the outskirts of the city. He reported finding what appeared to be clothing and personal items scattered in a wooded area off a dirt road. Police immediately went to the location the hunter described. After searching the area, they discovered Amanda's body hidden in the brush. She was partially covered with leaves and branches. The scene was secured, and forensic teams began their investigation. Amanda's parents were notified later that day. Richard, who had spent his entire career in law enforcement, was devastated beyond words. Diane collapsed upon hearing the news and had to be taken to the hospital due to shock. Matthew, Jason, and Kyle rushed to Austin to be with their parents, and the entire family was consumed by grief. The medical examiner conducted an autopsy and determined that Amanda had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation. There were also signs of a struggle, defensive wounds on her hands and arms, and bruising on her face and body. DNA samples were collected from under Amanda's fingernails, where skin cells from her attacker were found. The DNA analysis from the evidence collected at Derek's apartment and car came back a few days later. The blood found in Derek's car matched Amanda's DNA. The hair found in the car also matched Amanda's DNA. Most significantly, the DNA collected from under Amanda's fingernails matched Derek Foster's DNA. With this overwhelming evidence, police arrested Derek Foster on Thursday, October 27th, and charged him with kidnapping and murder. During his arraignment, Derek pleaded not guilty and was held without bail. As the investigation continued, detectives discovered more disturbing information about Derek's past. They learned that he had a history of stalking behavior. In 2002, he had been issued a restraining order by a former girlfriend who accused him of harassment and following her. He had also been fired from a previous job for making unwanted advances toward a female coworker. Derek's trial began in May 2006. The prosecution presented the DNA evidence, the physical evidence found in Derek's apartment, and car, and testimony from Amanda's co-workers about Derek's obsessive behavior. They also presented the notebook found in Derek's apartment, which painted a disturbing picture of his fixation on Amanda. The defense attempted to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and that there was no direct proof that Derek had killed Amanda. However, the DNA evidence was overwhelming, and the jury found it compelling. On the fourth day of the trial, Derek's attorney requested a meeting with the judge and the prosecution. Derek had decided to change his plea to guilty in exchange for avoiding the death penalty. He agreed to provide a full confession about what had happened on the night of October 22nd. In his confession, Derek described the events in detail, how he had waited for Amanda in the parking lot, how he had forced her into her car, driven to the secluded area, and ultimately killed her when she refused to be with him. He expressed some remorse, but primarily seemed focused on avoiding execution. The judge accepted the plea deal, and on May 18, 2006, Derek Foster was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom, Amanda's father, Richard, stood and stared at Derek with a look of pure hatred. Her mother, Diane, wept openly, held by her 3 sons. The death of Amanda Price had a profound and lasting impact on her family and community. Richard Price retired from the police force shortly after the trial, unable to continue his work after losing his daughter. Diane struggled with severe depression and required years of therapy to cope with her grief. Amanda's 3 brothers, Matthew, Jason, and Kyle, honored their sister's memory by establishing the Amanda Price Foundation in 2007. The foundation provides self-defense classes for young women, raises awareness about stalking and harassment, and offers support to families who have lost loved ones to violence. The University of Texas also established the Amanda Price Memorial Scholarship for journalism students, particularly those interested in investigative reporting. Each year, a deserving student receives financial assistance to pursue their education, just as Amanda had dreamed of doing. The Daily Grind coffee shop, where Amanda had worked, implemented new safety protocols following her death. These included security cameras in the parking lot, a policy requiring employees to walk out in pairs, and training for staff to recognize and report concerning behavior from customers. Amanda's case also led to changes in state law. In 2007, Texas passed legislation strengthening penalties for stalking and harassment, often referred to as Amanda's Law. The legislation made it easier for victims to obtain restraining orders and increased criminal penalties for violators. Derek Foster remains incarcerated at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. He has never shown genuine remorse for his actions and has been denied parole multiple times. Prison records indicate that he has had multiple disciplinary infractions and has not participated in any rehabilitation programs. Amanda Price is remembered by her family, friends, and community as a talented writer, a loving daughter and sister, and a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. Her death serves as a tragic reminder of the dangers of obsession and the importance of taking threats and harassment seriously. Her mother, Diane, who eventually found the strength to speak publicly about Amanda's case, said in an interview years later, Amanda was full of life and had so much to offer the world. She wanted to be a voice for the voiceless, and in a way, her story has done exactly that. If her death can prevent even one other family from experiencing this pain, then something good has come from this tragedy. Amanda's story continues to be shared in discussions about personal safety, stalking awareness, and the importance of trusting one's instincts when someone's behavior feels wrong. The case of Laura Mitchell and David Chen. Laura Ann Mitchell was born on November 14, 1979, in Seattle, Washington. She was the eldest daughter of James and Patricia Mitchell. Her father worked as an architect, and her mother was a nurse at Seattle General Hospital. Laura had one younger sister, Christine, who was born 3 years after her. The Mitchell family lived in a comfortable home in the Capitol Hill neighborhood and was well integrated into the community. From a young age, Laura displayed a natural aptitude for science and mathematics. She was curious about how things worked and would often take apart household items to understand their mechanisms. Her parents encouraged this curiosity, buying her science kits and books about biology and chemistry. Teachers at school recognized Laura's intelligence and recommended that she be placed in advanced classes. During her teenage years, Laura excelled academically and was particularly drawn to the field of medicine. She volunteered at her mother's hospital during summers, helping with basic tasks and observing doctors and nurses at work. These experiences solidified her desire to become a doctor. Laura was also socially active, participating in the debate team and serving as president of the science club during her senior year of high school. In 1997, Laura graduated as valedictorian of her class and received a full scholarship to the University of Washington, where she planned to pursue a degree in biology before attending medical school. Her parents were immensely proud, and her sister Christine looked up to her as a role model. Laura's undergraduate years were successful. She maintained a high grade point average, conducted research in a biology lab, and volunteered at free clinics in underserved neighborhoods. She was accepted into the University of Washington School of Medicine in 2001 and began her medical studies that fall. It was during her first year of medical school that Laura met David Chen. David was born on March 8, 1978, in Portland, Oregon, making him about a year and a half older than Laura. He was also a first-year medical student at the University of Washington. David came from a family of physicians. His father was a cardiologist, his mother was a pediatrician, and his older brother was completing his residency in surgery. David felt significant pressure to succeed and follow in his family's footsteps. Laura and David were assigned to the same study group during their first semester. They quickly bonded over the demanding coursework and long study sessions. Their classmates noticed that Laura and David worked well together, complementing each other's strengths. Laura was methodical and detail-oriented, while David was quick-thinking and good at seeing the bigger picture. By the spring semester of 2002, Laura and David had begun dating. Their relationship seemed natural and healthy. They spent much of their time together studying, attending classes, and occasionally going out for dinner or movies when they could spare the time. Laura's family met David and approved of him, impressed by his intelligence and ambition. David's family also welcomed Laura, pleased that their son had found someone who shared his dedication to medicine. Over the next 2 years, Laura and David's relationship grew more serious. They supported each other through the grueling demands of medical school, celebrated each other's successes, and helped each other through challenging times. By their third year, when medical students begin their clinical rotations, Laura and David discussed moving in together. They found a small apartment near the hospital and settled into a comfortable routine. However, as the pressures of clinical rotations intensified, cracks began to appear in their relationship. David was struggling with certain aspects of his training. He found the long hours exhausting and became increasingly frustrated when he didn't perform as well as he expected. His family's high expectations weighed heavily on him, and he became irritable and withdrawn. Laura, on the other hand, was thriving in her clinical rotations. She excelled in patient care, received excellent evaluations from her supervising physicians, and was being considered for competitive residency programs. Her success seemed to highlight David's struggles, and tension grew between them. By the fall of 2004, during their fourth and final year of medical school, David's behavior had changed noticeably. He became jealous of Laura's accomplishments and would sometimes make dismissive comments about her achievements. He started drinking more frequently, often having several glasses of wine or beer in the evening to take the edge off. Laura expressed concern about his drinking, but David insisted it was just a way to relax after stressful days. Arguments between Laura and David became more frequent. They would fight about small things, household chores, study schedules, social plans. But underneath these surface disagreements was a deeper issue. David resented Laura's success and felt inadequate in comparison. Laura, meanwhile, was growing tired of David's negativity and lack of support. In December 2004, Laura began to seriously consider ending the relationship. She confided in her sister Christine, telling her that she felt David had changed and that she wasn't happy anymore. Christine encouraged Laura to trust her instincts and reminded her that she deserved to be with someone who supported her and made her happy. However, Laura hesitated. She and David had been together for nearly 3 years, and they had built a life together. She also felt sympathy for David, knowing how much pressure he was under from his family. She hoped that once they both graduated and began their residencies, things would improve. On Saturday, January 15th, 2005, Laura and David both had the day off from their clinical rotations. It was a rare occurrence, as their schedules rarely aligned. Laura suggested they spend the day together doing something relaxing, perhaps taking a walk around Green Lake or visiting the Seattle Art Museum. David agreed, and the morning started pleasantly enough. However, around noon, David received a phone call from his father. Laura could hear only David's side of the conversation, but it was clear that his father was disappointed about something. After David hung up, he was visibly upset. Laura asked what was wrong, and David explained that his father had heard from the program director at a prestigious hospital where David had applied for a surgical residency. David had not been selected for an interview, and his father was questioning whether David was taking his career seriously enough. Laura tried to comfort David, but he pulled away from her. He poured himself a drink, even though it was early afternoon. Laura suggested that perhaps David was putting too much pressure on himself, and that there were many good residency programs that would be fortunate to have him. David interpreted this as Laura being condescending and accused her of not understanding his situation. The argument escalated quickly. David brought up the fact that Laura had received multiple residency interview invitations, including from some of the most competitive programs in the country. He accused her of rubbing her success in his face. Laura was shocked by this accusation and tried to defend herself, pointing out that she had always been supportive of him. David continued drinking throughout the afternoon, and his mood grew increasingly dark. Laura decided to leave the apartment to give him space to cool down. She told David she was going to visit her parents and would be back later that evening. David didn't respond. Laura drove to her parents' house in Capitol Hill, arriving around 3 p.m. She spent the afternoon with her mother and sister, discussing what had happened with David. Patricia and Christine both expressed concern about David's drinking and his treatment of Laura. They encouraged her to consider whether the relationship was healthy for her. At around 7 p.m., Laura decided to return to the apartment. She hoped that David had calmed down and that they could have a more productive conversation about their relationship. She said goodbye to her family and made the drive back to the apartment, which took about 20 minutes. When Laura arrived at the apartment around 7:30 p.m., she found David sitting on the couch in the dark. The television was off, and he appeared to have been drinking more. Empty beer bottles and a half-empty whiskey bottle sat on the coffee table. Laura turned on a light and asked David if he was okay. David looked at Laura with an expression she had never seen before, cold and full of anger. He stood up and began accusing Laura of thinking she was better than him. He said she had always looked down on him and that she probably told her family how pathetic he was. Laura tried to de-escalate the situation, speaking calmly and suggesting they talk about this when he was sober. This only seemed to anger David more. He stepped closer to Laura, invading her personal space. Laura backed away, feeling genuinely frightened for the first time in their relationship. She told David that she was going to spend the night at her parents' house and that they would talk tomorrow when he had sobered up. As Laura turned to leave, David grabbed her arm. Laura pulled away and told him not to touch her. David's grip tightened, and he pulled her back toward him. Laura tried to break free, but David was stronger. A physical struggle ensued, with Laura attempting to get to the door, and David preventing her from leaving. In the struggle, Laura managed to push David away. She ran toward the door, but David caught up to her in the small entrance hallway. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. David, in a rage fueled by alcohol and resentment, pushed Laura hard against the wall. Her head struck the corner of a picture frame, and she fell to the floor, disoriented. David stood over Laura, breathing heavily. For a moment, he seemed to realize what he had done. Laura was conscious but dazed, with blood running down the side of her face from where her head had hit the frame. She looked up at David with fear and confusion. Instead of helping her or calling for medical assistance, David panicked. His alcohol-impaired judgment led him to make a catastrophic decision. He couldn't let Laura leave and tell people what he had done. His career, his family's reputation, everything would be ruined. In his twisted, drunken logic, he convinced himself that there was only one way to prevent this. David grabbed a decorative statue from the nearby bookshelf, a heavy, bronze piece that Laura's parents had given them as a housewarming gift. Before Laura could process what was happening, David struck her repeatedly with the statue. Laura tried to defend herself, raising her arms to protect her head, but the attack was sudden and brutal. Within minutes, Laura was unconscious and bleeding severely. David dropped the statue and stared at what he had done. The reality of the situation slowly penetrated his drunken haze. Laura was not moving. He checked for a pulse and found one, but it was weak and irregular. Blood pooled on the floor around her head. David's medical training kicked in, and he knew Laura was in critical condition. However, instead of calling 911, he froze. He knew that calling for help would mean the end of everything. His medical career, his freedom, his family's respect. He sat on the floor next to Laura's body, paralyzed by fear and indecision. After what might have been minutes or hours, David would later say he couldn't remember. He finally came to a decision. He would stage the scene to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. He went to the bedroom and searched through Laura's jewelry box, taking several pieces and placing them in a bag. He then broke a window in the living room from the inside, scattering glass to make it look like someone had broken in. David then wiped down the statue he had used and placed it back on the bookshelf, hoping any blood on it would go unnoticed in the chaos. He took Laura's purse and her laptop computer and hid them in the trunk of his car. By this time, it was after midnight. Laura had stopped breathing. David checked for a pulse again and found none. Laura Mitchell was dead at the age of 25. David left the apartment and drove aimlessly around Seattle for several hours, trying to figure out what to do next. Eventually, he went to his parents' house in Madison Park. He arrived around 4 a.m. and let himself in with his key. He went to the guest bedroom and tried to sleep, but couldn't. At 7 a.m. on Sunday morning, David's mother found him awake in the guest bedroom. She asked what he was doing there, and David told her that he and Laura had gotten into an argument, and he had come to his parents' house to cool off. His mother, concerned, asked if everything was all right. David assured her it was just a disagreement and that they would work it out. At 9:30 a.m., Laura's sister, Christine, tried calling Laura's cell phone to see if she wanted to meet for brunch. The call went straight to voicemail. Christine tried again at 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. with the same result. Growing concerned, she called her parents. Patricia Mitchell decided to drive to Laura and David's apartment to check on her daughter. She arrived at around 11:45 a.m. and knocked on the door. There was no answer. She tried calling Laura's phone again, and this time she could hear it ringing inside the apartment. Patricia's concern deepened. Patricia called James, who arrived about 15 minutes later. Together, they used the spare key that Laura had given them for emergencies. As they opened the door, they immediately saw the broken window and the chaos in the living room. Patricia called out for Laura, but there was no response. James walked further into the apartment and found Laura's body in the hallway. She was lying on the floor in a pool of dried blood. James immediately checked for signs of life, but found none. Patricia, seeing her husband's expression, ran forward and saw her daughter's body. She let out a scream that neighbors would later describe as the most heartbreaking sound they had ever heard. James called 911 while Patricia collapsed beside her daughter's body. sobbing. Within minutes, police and paramedics arrived at the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Laura was deceased and had been for several hours. The police secured the scene and began their investigation. Detectives noted the broken window and the signs of a struggle. They also noticed that the apartment appeared to have been ransacked. Drawers were open and items were scattered around. Initial impressions suggested a burglary that had turned violent. However, experienced investigators quickly noticed some inconsistencies. The glass from the broken window had fallen inward, not outward, as would be expected if someone had broken in from outside. Additionally, expensive electronics like the television were still present, which seemed odd for a burglary. Detective Robert Patterson, who was assigned to lead the investigation, immediately wanted to speak with David Chen. When asked about David's whereabouts, Patricia told detectives that Laura had mentioned visiting her parents the previous evening because of an argument with David. Detectives went to the Chen residence in Madison Park. David's parents answered the door and appeared shocked when detectives explained why they were there. They informed the detectives that David was upstairs and called him down. David appeared disheveled and exhausted when he came to the door. Detectives asked if they could speak with him privately, and David agreed to go to the police station to answer questions. At the station, Detective Patterson began by expressing condolences about Laura's death. He then asked David to describe his activities over the past 24 hours. David explained that he and Laura had argued on Saturday afternoon about his residency applications. He said Laura had left to visit her parents, and he had stayed at the apartment drinking. He claimed that later in the evening, he had decided to go to his parents' house to sleep off the alcohol and cool down. He said he never saw Laura return to the apartment. Detective Patterson asked David what time he had left the apartment. David said it was around 9 p.m. The detective noted that David's timeline would mean he left before Laura returned at 7:30 p.m., which contradicted what Laura had told her family. However, David claimed he must have left after Laura, as he didn't see her when he departed. As the interview continued, Detective Patterson noticed several things about David's appearance. He had scratches on his forearms and hands. When asked about these, David said he had scratched himself while working in his parents' yard the previous weekend. The detective also noticed that David's knuckles appeared bruised and slightly swollen. Detective Patterson then asked David if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample and fingerprints. David hesitated but agreed. He also consented to having his car searched. During the search of David's car, investigators found Laura's purse and laptop computer hidden in the trunk. When confronted with this evidence, David's expression changed. He said he couldn't explain how those items got there and requested a lawyer. The interview was terminated, but David was not allowed to leave. Based on the evidence found in his car and the inconsistencies in his story, David was arrested and charged with Laura's murder. Forensic examination of the apartment revealed crucial evidence. Blood spatter analysis showed that Laura had been attacked in the hallway where her body was found, and the pattern of blood was consistent with someone striking her multiple times with a blunt object. The blood on the bronze statue matched Laura's DNA, despite David's attempts to clean it. DNA evidence was also found under Laura's fingernails, where she had apparently scratched her attacker during the struggle. The DNA matched David Chen's profile. Additionally, fibers from David's shirt were found clutched in Laura's hand. The medical examiner determined that Laura had died from blunt force trauma to the head. She had suffered multiple skull fractures and severe brain injury. The examiner estimated the time of death to be between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on Saturday evening, contradicting David's claim that he had left the apartment before Laura returned. David Chen's trial began in September 2005. The prosecution presented the overwhelming physical evidence: the DNA under Laura's fingernails, the fibers from David's clothing, Laura's belongings found in his car, and the blood evidence linking David to the crime scene. They also presented testimony from Laura's family about the deterioration of the relationship and David's drinking problem. The prosecution argued that David had killed Laura in a fit of rage fueled by jealousy, alcohol, and insecurity. They pointed to the scratches and bruises on David's body as evidence of a struggle. They also highlighted David's attempt to stage the scene as a burglary, showing consciousness of guilt. David's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that David's presence at the scene and the DNA evidence could be explained by the fact that he lived with Laura. They suggested that someone else could have broken into the apartment after David left and killed Laura. However, this theory was undermined by the glass evidence and the lack of any sign of forced entry. The defense also attempted to paint Laura as someone who had been under significant stress and suggested she might have attacked David first, leading to a struggle in self-defense. However, the forensic evidence did not support this theory, and Laura's family and friends testified to her peaceful nature. On October 20th, 2005, after 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on charges of second-degree murder. The jury found that while David had likely not premeditated Laura's death, he had killed her during a violent assault and then attempted to cover up the crime. On November 15th, 2005, David Chen was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. As the sentence was read, Laura's family held each other and cried. James Mitchell stood and read a victim impact statement describing Laura's dreams of becoming a doctor and helping people. He said that David had not only taken Laura's life, but had also destroyed the lives she would have saved as a physician. David's parents sat in the courtroom, visibly devastated. His father, who had pushed David so hard to succeed, appeared to have aged years in the months since Laura's death. His mother wept silently. David showed little emotion as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. The death of Laura Mitchell had a profound impact on many people. Her family was shattered by the loss. Patricia Mitchell suffered a nervous breakdown and required hospitalization. James Mitchell became an advocate for domestic violence awareness, speaking publicly about the warning signs he wished he had recognized in David's behavior. Christine Mitchell, Laura's younger sister, changed her career path. She had been studying business, but after Laura's death, she decided to become a social worker, specializing in domestic violence intervention. She said she wanted to help people recognize unhealthy relationships before they turned deadly. The University of Washington School of Medicine established the Laura Mitchell Memorial Fund, which provides scholarships to medical students who demonstrate not only academic excellence, but also compassion and dedication to serving underserved communities. Each year at graduation, the school presents the Laura Mitchell Award to a graduating student who embodies these values. The case also prompted discussions within the medical education community about the intense pressures faced by medical students and residents. Several medical schools implemented new mental health and support services, recognizing that the stress of medical training can sometimes lead to unhealthy behaviors and relationship problems. David Chen's medical license was revoked, and he will never practice medicine. He remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary. In a 2015 parole hearing, David finally acknowledged his actions and expressed remorse. However, his parole was denied, and he will not be eligible for another hearing until 2025. Laura Mitchell is remembered by her family, friends, and community as a brilliant, compassionate young woman who dedicated her life to helping others. Her death at the hands of someone she loved and trusted serves as a tragic reminder that domestic violence can happen to anyone, regardless of education, social status, or background. Patricia Mitchell, who eventually found the strength to speak publicly about Laura's death, said in an interview, "Laura was going to be an amazing doctor. She cared so deeply about people and wanted to make a difference in the world." David took that away from her, from us, and from all the patients she would have helped. We will never get over losing her, but we try to honor her memory by helping others recognize the warning signs we missed. Laura's story continues to be shared in medical schools and domestic violence prevention programs as a reminder of the importance of recognizing relationship warning signs and the devastating consequences of unchecked anger and violence. The case of Rachel Thornton. Rachel Elizabeth Thornton was born on July 3, 1983 in Portland, Maine. She was the second of 3 children born to William and Margaret Thornton. Her father worked as a high school history teacher, and her mother was a real estate agent. Rachel grew up with her older brother Thomas and younger sister Emily in a middle-class neighborhood near the coast. From an early age, Rachel was described as adventurous and outgoing. She loved the ocean and spent much of her childhood at the beach, collecting shells and watching the waves. She was fascinated by marine life and would spend hours reading books about dolphins, whales, and other sea creatures. Her parents encouraged her interests, taking the family on trips to aquariums and coastal nature reserves. During her school years, Rachel was an active and popular student. She participated in the swim team, was a member of the environmental club, and volunteered with local beach cleanup organizations. Teachers described her as enthusiastic and dedicated, particularly when it came to subjects related to science and the environment. Rachel dreamed of becoming a marine biologist and working to protect ocean ecosystems. In high school, Rachel maintained strong grades while balancing her extracurricular activities. She was known for her bright smile and positive attitude. Her best friend since elementary school, Katie Morrison, remained close with Rachel throughout their teenage years. The two girls were inseparable, often studying together and planning their futures. Both of them hoped to attend college together and pursue careers in science. In 2001, Rachel graduated from high school with honors and received a scholarship to the University of Maine. where she planned to study marine biology. Her family was incredibly proud of her achievements. William, her father, gave an emotional speech at her graduation party, talking about how Rachel had always known what she wanted and had worked tirelessly to achieve her goals. Rachel's first year of college went smoothly. She adjusted well to university life, joined several environmental organizations on campus, and threw herself into her studies. She maintained her friendship with Katie, who had also enrolled at the University of Maine, but was studying elementary education. The two friends would meet regularly for lunch and study sessions. During her sophomore year, in the fall of 2002, Rachel met Brandon West at a campus environmental rally. Brandon was a senior studying environmental engineering. He was tall, athletic, and shared Rachel's passion for environmental conservation. They struck up a conversation about ocean pollution, and Rachel was impressed by Brandon's knowledge and dedication to environmental causes. Brandon and Rachel began dating shortly after that meeting. Their relationship seemed ideal at first. They would go hiking together, attend environmental conferences, and volunteer for beach cleanup projects. Rachel's friends and family liked Brandon, seeing him as mature and responsible. He seemed to support Rachel's academic goals and encouraged her passion for marine biology. However, as their relationship progressed into 2003, some concerning patterns began to emerge. Brandon was graduating in May and had accepted a job with an environmental consulting firm in Boston, Massachusetts. He wanted Rachel to transfer to a university in Boston so they could be together. Rachel was hesitant because the University of Maine had an excellent marine biology program, and she was conducting research with a professor she greatly admired. Brandon became increasingly persistent about Rachel transferring to Boston. He would bring it up constantly, arguing that if she truly loved him, she would make the sacrifice. Rachel felt torn between her relationship and her academic goals. She discussed the situation with Katie, who advised her to put her education first. Katie pointed out that if Brandon truly loved Rachel, he would support her staying at the University of Maine. Despite her friend's advice, Rachel eventually agreed to apply to several universities in Boston for a possible transfer in the fall of 2004. However, she made it clear to Brandon that she wasn't certain about the decision and wanted to wait and see how things developed. Brandon seemed satisfied with this compromise and graduated in May 2003, moving to Boston to start his new job. For the next several months, Rachel and Brandon maintained a long-distance relationship. Brandon would drive to Portland to visit Rachel on weekends, or Rachel would take the bus to Boston. The distance put strain on their relationship. Brandon would often complain that Rachel wasn't making enough effort to see him, and Rachel felt that Brandon didn't understand how demanding her coursework was. By the winter of 2003, Rachel was having serious doubts about transferring to Boston. She had been accepted into a competitive research program at the University of Maine that would begin in the fall of 2004. The program would allow her to conduct field work studying marine ecosystems along the Maine coast, something she had dreamed about since childhood. Rachel decided that she wanted to stay at the University of Maine and complete her degree there. When Rachel told Brandon about her decision in early December 2003, he did not take it well. They had a heated argument over the phone, with Brandon accusing Rachel of not caring about their relationship. Rachel tried to explain that her education was important to her and that Brandon could visit Portland on weekends. Brandon hung up on her, and they didn't speak for several days. Eventually, Brandon called back and apologized for his reaction. He said he understood that Rachel's education was important and that he supported her decision. Rachel was relieved and thought they had worked through the issue. However, Brandon's behavior in the following months suggested otherwise. He became more controlling, frequently calling and texting to check on what Rachel was doing and who she was with. If Rachel didn't respond immediately, Brandon would become angry and accusatory. Rachel confided in Katie about Brandon's behavior. Katie expressed concern and suggested that Brandon's controlling behavior was a red flag. She encouraged Rachel to consider whether the relationship was healthy for her. Rachel acknowledged that things weren't perfect, but said she believed Brandon's behavior was due to the stress of his new job and the distance between them. On Friday, March 12, 2004, Rachel finished her classes for the day and returned to her apartment around 4 p.m. She lived in a small off-campus apartment with two roommates, Jennifer Cole and Melissa Harper. Both of Rachel's roommates were out for the evening. Jennifer was visiting her boyfriend, and Melissa had gone home to visit her family for the weekend. Rachel had plans to have a quiet evening studying for an upcoming exam. She ordered pizza for dinner and settled in at her desk with her textbooks. At around 7:30 p.m., her phone rang. It was Brandon, calling from Boston. Rachel answered, and they talked for about 15 minutes. According to phone records, the conversation seemed normal at first, but Rachel's roommate Jennifer later said that Rachel had mentioned Brandon was upset about something. At approximately 8 p.m., Rachel received a text message from Brandon saying he was coming to Portland and would be there around 10 p.m. Rachel was surprised, as Brandon had not mentioned planning to visit that weekend. She texted back asking if everything was okay, but Brandon didn't respond. Rachel called Katie at around 8:30 p.m. and told her that Brandon was on his way to Portland unexpectedly. Katie asked if Rachel wanted her to come over and stay with her, sensing that something might be wrong. Rachel said she would be fine, but promised to call Katie if she needed anything. At 9:45 p.m., Rachel sent a text message to Katie that said, "He's here. I'll call you later." That was the last communication anyone received from Rachel Thornton. The next morning, Saturday, March 13th, Jennifer returned to the apartment around 11 a.m. She noticed that Rachel's car was not in the parking lot, which was unusual because Rachel rarely went anywhere early on Saturday mornings. Jennifer went inside and knocked on Rachel's bedroom door, but there was no answer. She opened the door and found the room empty. Rachel's bed appeared to have been slept in, but Rachel was gone. Jennifer assumed Rachel had gone out, perhaps to the library or to meet a friend. However, when Rachel hadn't returned by 3 p.m. and wasn't answering her phone, Jennifer became concerned. She called Katie to see if Rachel was with her. Katie said she hadn't heard from Rachel since the text message the previous night. Katie immediately became alarmed. She told Jennifer about Brandon's unexpected visit and said she was going to drive over to the apartment. When Katie arrived, she and Jennifer searched Rachel's room for any clues about where she might have gone. They found Rachel's purse on her desk, which was strange because Rachel never went anywhere without her purse. Her wallet, ID, and credit cards were all inside. Katie tried calling Brandon's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She left a message asking if he knew where Rachel was and requesting that he call back immediately. When Brandon didn't respond, Katie and Jennifer decided to call the police. The Portland Police Department dispatched an officer to take a missing persons report. Officer Daniel Brooks arrived at the apartment at around 4:30 p.m. and spoke with Katie and Jennifer. They explained the situation and expressed their concern that something was wrong. Officer Brooks took down all the information and put out a bulletin for Rachel and her car, a 1998 silver Honda Civic. Detective Sarah Chen was assigned to investigate Rachel's disappearance. She began by interviewing Rachel's friends, family, and roommates. Katie told Detective Chen about Brandon's controlling behavior and the fact that he had unexpectedly driven to Portland the night Rachel disappeared. This information immediately made Brandon a person of interest. Detective Chen attempted to contact Brandon multiple times on Saturday evening and Sunday morning, but her calls went to voicemail. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, Brandon called back. He told Detective Chen that he had driven to Portland on Friday night to visit Rachel. He said they had talked for a couple of hours at her apartment and that everything had been fine. According to Brandon, he left Rachel's apartment around midnight and drove back to Boston, arriving home around 3 a.m. Saturday morning. Detective Chen asked Brandon if anyone could verify his timeline. Brandon said his roommate could confirm what time he arrived home. When Detective Chen contacted the roommate, a man named Derek Price, Derek said he had been asleep and hadn't heard Brandon come in, so he couldn't confirm the time. Detective Chen found Brandon's story suspicious. If Brandon had left Rachel's apartment at midnight, why hadn't Rachel responded to any calls or messages since Friday night? And why had Rachel's car disappeared? Detective Chen asked Brandon if he knew where Rachel might have gone. Brandon said he had no idea and seemed annoyed by the questions. On Monday, March 15th, Detective Chen obtained phone records for both Rachel and Brandon. The records showed that Brandon's phone had pinged off cell towers in Portland until approximately 2:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, much later than the midnight departure time he had claimed. This discrepancy raised significant red flags. Detective Chen also learned something else troubling. Brandon had called his father, a lawyer named Robert West, at 3:47 a.m. on Saturday morning. The call lasted 17 minutes. When Detective Chen contacted Robert West, he said that Brandon had called him to discuss a personal matter, but he refused to provide details, citing attorney-client privilege. On Tuesday, March 16th, a major break in the case occurred. A state trooper patrolling a rural area about 40 miles north of Portland noticed a silver Honda Civic parked in an abandoned rest area off Highway 295. The trooper ran the license plate and discovered it was registered to Rachel Thornton. The trooper immediately called for backup and secured the scene. Detective Chen and her team rushed to the location. The car was locked, and there was no sign of Rachel. However, when investigators looked in the windows, they could see what appeared to be blood on the passenger seat and dashboard. They also noticed that items were scattered throughout the car: textbooks, papers, and clothing. A search warrant was obtained, and forensic teams processed the vehicle. They found significant amounts of blood throughout the interior of the car, particularly on the passenger seat, center console, and floor mats. There were also signs of a struggle. The passenger side window was cracked, and there were scratches on the dashboard. DNA analysis of the blood confirmed it belonged to Rachel Thornton. Investigators also found another DNA profile mixed with Rachel's blood, DNA from saliva and skin cells. This profile did not match Rachel's DNA and appeared to belong to someone who had been in close contact with her during a violent struggle. The discovery of Rachel's car with blood evidence transformed the investigation from a missing person case to a suspected homicide. Detective Chen immediately obtained a warrant to collect a DNA sample from Brandon West. Boston police were dispatched to Brandon's apartment on Wednesday, March 17th. When officers arrived at Brandon's apartment, he was not home. His roommate, Derek, said Brandon had left early that morning and hadn't said where he was going. Attempts to reach Brandon by phone were unsuccessful. His phone appeared to be turned off. Brandon's disappearance only strengthened suspicions that he was involved in Rachel's disappearance. A warrant was issued for his arrest, and his name and photo were distributed to law enforcement agencies throughout New England. Meanwhile, search teams were scouring the area around where Rachel's car had been found. The location was heavily wooded, with several hiking trails and dense forest. Searchers used cadaver dogs to help locate any evidence. On Thursday, March 18th, one of the dogs alerted to an area about half a mile into the woods from the rest area. Investigators carefully approached the location and discovered freshly disturbed earth. Using careful excavation techniques, they uncovered what they feared most: human remains buried in a shallow grave. The body was partially decomposed, but was wearing clothing that matched the description of what Rachel had been wearing the night she disappeared. The remains were transported to the medical examiner's office for identification and autopsy. Dental records confirmed that the body was Rachel Thornton. The medical examiner determined that Rachel had died from blunt force trauma to the head and strangulation. She had suffered multiple skull fractures and a broken jaw, indicating a severe beating. The examiner estimated that Rachel had been dead for approximately 5 to 6 days, consistent with her disappearance on Friday, March 12th. The discovery of Rachel's body devastated her family. William and Margaret Thornton had held on to hope that Rachel might still be alive, perhaps injured and unable to contact them. The confirmation of her death shattered them completely. Thomas and Emily rushed home from their respective colleges to be with their parents. The entire Thornton family was consumed by grief and shock. The search for Brandon West intensified. On Friday, March 19th, a tip came in from a motel clerk in Vermont. The clerk had seen news reports about Brandon and recognized him as a guest who had checked in 2 days earlier. Vermont State Police and U.S. Marshals converged on the motel. Brandon was arrested without incident in his motel room. He was found with a significant amount of cash, a fake ID, and what appeared to be plans to flee to Canada. He was immediately transported back to Maine to face charges. During his initial interrogation, Brandon exercised his right to remain silent and requested an attorney. His father, Robert West, arrived from Boston and represented him. Brandon was formally charged with murder, and bail was denied. Forensic evidence continued to mount against Brandon. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood and biological material found in Rachel's car matched Brandon's DNA profile. Investigators also found Brandon's fingerprints throughout Rachel's car, including on the steering wheel and gear shift, indicating he had driven the vehicle. Police searched Brandon's car, a blue Toyota Camry, and found additional evidence. There were traces of blood on the driver's side floor mat that matched Rachel's DNA. They also found strands of Rachel's hair on the passenger seat and fibers from Rachel's clothing in the trunk. Perhaps most damning was evidence found on Brandon's laptop computer. Investigators discovered that Brandon had conducted several internet searches in the days before Rachel's disappearance, including how to dispose of a body, remote locations in Maine, and how long does DNA last. These searches had been conducted on March 10th and 11th, just days before Rachel disappeared. Brandon's trial began in October 2004. The prosecution presented a comprehensive case built on forensic evidence, witness testimony, and Brandon's own actions. They argued that Brandon had driven to Portland on Friday, March 12th, with the intention of confronting Rachel about their relationship. When Rachel had refused to move to Boston or back down on her decision to stay at the University of Maine, Brandon had become enraged. According to the prosecution's theory, Brandon had attacked Rachel in her apartment, striking her repeatedly. He had then forced her into her car and driven to the remote rest area he had researched online. There, he had completed the assault, strangling Rachel to death. He had then buried her body in the woods and abandoned her car before driving back to Boston. The prosecution highlighted Brandon's attempts to flee, his false statements to police about when he left Rachel's apartment, and his suspicious call to his father in the early morning hours after Rachel's disappearance. They also presented testimony from Rachel's friends about Brandon's controlling behavior and anger when Rachel decided not to transfer to Boston. Brandon's defense team argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the prosecution's timeline was based on assumptions. They claimed that someone else could have killed Rachel after Brandon left her apartment. However, this theory was difficult to maintain given the overwhelming forensic evidence linking Brandon to the crime scene and Rachel's car. The defense also attempted to argue that if Brandon had killed Rachel, it had been in a moment of passion during an argument, not premeditated murder. However, the prosecution countered with the internet searches Brandon had conducted days before the murder, demonstrating planning and forethought. The trial lasted 3 weeks. On November 3rd, 2004, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on charges of first-degree murder. The jury found that Brandon had planned Rachel's murder and carried it out with deliberation and premeditation. On December 10th, 2004, Brandon West was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Rachel's mother, Margaret, collapsed in the courtroom and had to be helped out by her husband and children. William Thornton stood and faced Brandon, his voice breaking as he said, "You took our daughter from us. You took her future, her dreams, everything she could have been. I hope you spend every day for the rest of your life thinking about what you did." Brandon showed little emotion during the sentencing. His parents sat in the back of the courtroom, his mother crying quietly and his father staring straight ahead with a blank expression. As Brandon was led out in handcuffs, he glanced briefly at his parents but said nothing. The death of Rachel Thornton had a profound impact on everyone who knew her. Her family struggled immensely with their loss. Margaret Thornton developed severe depression and anxiety and required years of therapy. William Thornton took a leave of absence from teaching and eventually retired early, unable to focus on his work. Thomas and Emily both struggled academically and emotionally, with Emily ultimately taking a year off from college to be with her family. Katie Morrison, Rachel's best friend, was deeply affected by the loss. She blamed herself for not doing more to protect Rachel, even though rationally she knew there was nothing she could have done. Katie eventually became a counselor specializing in domestic violence and relationship abuse, dedicating her career to helping others recognize warning signs that she felt she had missed in Rachel's relationship. The University of Maine established the Rachel Thornton Memorial Scholarship for female students pursuing degrees in marine biology. The scholarship is awarded annually to a student who demonstrates academic excellence and a commitment to environmental conservation, the values Rachel embodied. The community where Rachel grew up also honored her memory. The town of Portland designated a portion of the local beach as the Rachel Thornton Marine Preserve, an area protected for environmental education and research. A plaque at the entrance reads, "In memory of Rachel Elizabeth Thornton, who loved the ocean and dreamed of protecting it. Her spirit lives on in these waters." Rachel's case also prompted important discussions about relationship abuse and control in young adults. Many people, including Rachel's family and friends, expressed regret that they hadn't recognized Brandon's controlling behavior as a serious warning sign. Domestic violence advocates used Rachel's story to educate others about the patterns of control and isolation that often precede physical violence. Margaret Thornton eventually found the strength to speak publicly about Rachel's case. In a 2010 interview, she said, "Rachel was strong and independent. She knew what she wanted from life. But even strong women can find themselves in dangerous situations with controlling partners." The warning signs were there. His need to control where she lived, his anger when she prioritized her education, his jealousy and constant checking up on her. We didn't realize how dangerous these behaviors were until it was too late. Brandon West remains incarcerated at the Maine State Prison. He has never expressed remorse for his actions and has maintained that the evidence against him was circumstantial. Despite the overwhelming DNA and digital evidence, he has been denied any appeals and will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Rachel Thornton is remembered by her family, friends, and community as a bright, passionate young woman who loved the ocean and wanted to make the world a better place. Her death at the age of 20, at the hands of someone who claimed to love her, serves as a tragic reminder of the dangers of controlling and abusive relationships. The Rachel Thornton Foundation, established by her family in 2005, provides education about healthy relationships to high school and college students throughout Maine. The foundation has reached thousands of young people with its message about recognizing warning signs and seeking help before situations become dangerous. Rachel's professor at the University of Maine, Dr. Patricia Reynolds, who had worked closely with Rachel on research projects, said in a memorial service, "Rachel had a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart. She would have made extraordinary contributions to marine biology and ocean conservation. The world lost something precious when we lost Rachel, and we must honor her memory by protecting others from similar fates." Rachel's story continues to be shared as part of domestic violence prevention programs across the country, ensuring that her death was not in vain and that others might be saved by learning from the tragedy that took her life. The case of Christina Hayes. Christina Marie Hayes was born on January 28, 1980, in Richmond, Virginia. She was the only child of Robert and Susan Hayes. Her father worked as an accountant for a large corporation, and her mother was a kindergarten teacher. The Hayes family lived in a comfortable suburban home in the West End neighborhood of Richmond and was actively involved in their local community. From an early age, Christina displayed a natural talent for art and creativity. She loved drawing, painting, and crafting, often spending hours in her room working on various projects. Her bedroom walls were covered with her artwork, and her parents encouraged her artistic pursuits by enrolling her in art classes and taking her to museums. Christina's mother, Susan, particularly enjoyed supporting her daughter's creativity, often joining her for art projects on weekends. During her school years, Christina was known as a quiet but friendly student. She had a small circle of close friends and was well liked by her teachers. She wasn't particularly outgoing, preferring to spend her free time reading, drawing, or listening to music. However, those who knew her well described Christina as kind, thoughtful, and deeply caring about others. In high school, Christina joined the yearbook committee and was responsible for much of the graphic design work. She also participated in the art club and won several awards for her paintings at local competitions. Her art teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Grant, recognized Christina's exceptional talent and encouraged her to pursue art professionally. After graduating from high school in 1998, Christina enrolled at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond to study graphic design. She thrived in the program, enjoying the technical aspects of design as well as the creative freedom it offered. During her college years, Christina maintained her close relationship with her parents, visiting home frequently and calling them regularly. Christina graduated from VCU in 2002 with a degree in graphic design. She was excited to begin her professional career and start applying the skills she had learned. After several months of job searching and freelance work, Christina was hired in October 2002 by Sterling Marketing Group, a mid-sized advertising agency in downtown Richmond. She was brought on as a junior graphic designer, working on various client projects, including brochures, advertisements, and website designs. Christina quickly proved herself to be a valuable member of the team. Her supervisor, Nancy Williams, praised Christina's work ethic, creativity, and attention to detail. Christina got along well with her coworkers and was known for being reliable and professional. She enjoyed her work and felt fortunate to have found a position that allowed her to use her artistic skills. The Sterling Marketing Group office was located in a modern building with about 40 employees spread across different departments. Christina worked in the creative department, which consisted of about 10 people, including designers, copywriters, and art directors. The atmosphere in the office was generally positive and collaborative. In early 2003, Sterling Marketing Group hired a new employee named Vincent Palmer to work in the sales department. Vincent was 32 years old, 12 years older than Christina. He had previously worked for several other companies in sales positions, though his employment history showed he rarely stayed at any one place for more than a year or two. Vincent was charming and outgoing, qualities that served him well in sales. He was friendly with everyone in the office and made an effort to introduce himself to all the employees. When he met Christina, he seemed particularly interested in her work. He would often stop by her desk to ask about the projects she was working on and compliment her designs. At first, Christina found Vincent's attention flattering but somewhat excessive. She mentioned to her co-worker and friend, Jennifer Mason, that Vincent seemed to visit the creative department more often than necessary. Jennifer joked that Vincent probably had a crush on Christina, which made Christina uncomfortable. She preferred to keep her professional and personal lives separate and wasn't interested in dating anyone from work. Over the following weeks, Vincent's attention toward Christina intensified. He began bringing her coffee in the mornings, leaving notes on her desk, complimenting her work, and inviting her to lunch. Christina politely declined most of his invitations, explaining that she usually ate lunch at her desk while working. However, Vincent was persistent. In April 2003, Vincent asked Christina if she would like to go out to dinner with him on a weekend. Christina, feeling uncomfortable, directly told Vincent that she wasn't interested in dating and would prefer to keep their relationship professional. Vincent seemed embarrassed and apologized for making her uncomfortable. Christina hoped that would be the end of it. However, Vincent's behavior did not stop. He continued to find excuses to visit Christina's desk, though he was less direct about his intentions. He would ask her technical questions about design, request her opinion on various matters, or simply make small talk. Christina tried to be polite, but kept their conversations brief. By June 2003, Vincent's behavior had become concerning. Christina noticed that he always seemed to be watching her. When she would look up from her work, she would often catch Vincent staring at her from across the office. If she went to the break room or the copy machine, Vincent would frequently appear there as well, as if he had been waiting for her. Christina confided in her supervisor, Nancy Williams, about the situation. Nancy took Christina's concerns seriously and spoke with Vincent's supervisor, a man named Thomas Clark. Thomas had a conversation with Vincent about maintaining professional boundaries, and Vincent promised to be more mindful of his behavior. For a few weeks, Vincent kept his distance, and Christina felt relieved. However, by August, his attention returned. This time, it took a more unsettling form. Christina began receiving emails from an anonymous account. The emails were not threatening, but were personal and romantic in nature, expressing admiration for Christina and disappointment that she wouldn't give the sender a chance. Christina suspected the emails were from Vincent, but she couldn't prove it. The email address provided no identifying information, and the messages were vague enough that they could have been from anyone. Christina reported the emails to her supervisor and to the IT department. but without proof of who was sending them, there was little they could do except block the email address. Around this same time, Christina began to feel like she was being followed. On several occasions when leaving work, she noticed a car that seemed to be trailing behind her as she drove home. The car was a dark blue sedan, and though she couldn't see the driver clearly, she had an uneasy feeling about it. She mentioned this to her parents, and her father, Robert, suggested she vary her route home and pay attention to see if the car appeared again. The car did appear again, multiple times over the course of several weeks. Christina wrote down the license plate number and considered reporting it to the police, but she wasn't sure if she was overreacting. The car never did anything overtly threatening. It simply seemed to follow her route. However, the feeling of being watched made Christina increasingly anxious. In September 2003, Christina's concerns escalated. She arrived at work one morning to find a bouquet of red roses on her desk with a card that read, "You deserve to be appreciated." The card was not signed. Christina immediately told Nancy Williams, who was alarmed by this development. Nancy called a meeting with HR and Vincent's supervisor to address the situation. When confronted, Vincent denied sending the flowers. He said he had no idea who had sent them and suggested that maybe Christina had a secret admirer outside of work. However, several coworkers had noticed Vincent acting strangely that morning, arriving at the office very early before most other employees. The building's security logs showed that Vincent had entered the building at 6:47 a.m., more than an hour before his usual arrival time. Despite the circumstantial evidence, Vincent continued to deny any involvement. The HR department issued him a formal warning about workplace harassment and made it clear that any further incidents would result in termination. Vincent seemed angry about the warning, but agreed to comply with the company's policies. After this incident, Vincent's behavior toward Christina changed. Instead of being friendly and persistent, he became cold and hostile. He would glare at her when they passed in the hallway, make sarcastic comments about her work in meetings, and generally create an uncomfortable atmosphere. Christina felt like she couldn't win. When Vincent had been friendly, it was uncomfortable, and now that he was hostile, it was even worse. Christina considered looking for a new job, but she had only been with Sterling Marketing Group for less than a year and didn't want to leave so soon. She enjoyed her work and her coworkers, and she didn't want to let Vincent drive her away from a job she had worked hard to get. Her parents encouraged her to stand her ground and continue reporting any concerning behavior to her supervisors. On Friday, November 14th, 2003, Christina had a normal day at work. She completed several design projects, had lunch with Jennifer at a nearby cafe, and left the office at her usual time of 5:30 p.m. Christina had plans to spend the weekend with her parents, as it was her father's birthday on Sunday, and the family was planning a small celebration. Christina walked to the parking garage where she kept her car, a red 2001 Ford Focus. The parking garage was located in the basement of the office building and was accessible to all employees with a key card. As Christina approached her car, she noticed something on her windshield. As she got closer, she saw it was a note tucked under the windshield wiper. The note, written in block letters on plain white paper, read, "You think you're too good for me? You're not. You'll regret this. Christina's heart began to race. She looked around the parking garage but saw no one. Most of the other employees had already left for the day, and the garage was eerily quiet. Christina's hands shook as she unlocked her car and got inside, locking the doors immediately. She considered calling the police, but decided to drive straight to her parents' house first. She carefully backed out of her parking space and headed toward the garage exit. As Christina drove up the ramp toward the exit, she noticed a car's headlights turn on behind her. It was a dark blue sedan, the same car that had been following her for weeks. Christina's anxiety spiked. She accelerated through the garage exit and onto the street, and the blue sedan followed. Christina made several turns, trying to see if the car would continue following her or turn off. The sedan stayed behind her, maintaining a consistent distance. Christina decided to drive to the nearest police station, rather than leading whoever was following her to her parents' house. However, as Christina turned onto a less traveled street that she thought would take her toward the police station, the blue sedan accelerated and pulled up beside her. Through her peripheral vision, Christina could see it was Vincent driving the car. Before she could react, Vincent swerved his car toward hers, forcing her off the road. Christina's car jumped the curb and crashed into a telephone pole on the side of the road. The impact deployed her airbag and left Christina dazed and disoriented. Her head had hit the side window during the impact, and she felt pain radiating through her skull. Vincent parked his car and got out, approaching Christina's vehicle. Christina, despite being injured and disoriented, had the presence of mind to try to lock her doors, but Vincent reached her car before she could. He opened the driver's side door and grabbed Christina by the arm, pulling her out of the car. Christina tried to scream, but Vincent covered her mouth with his hand. He dragged her toward his car, and despite her resistance, he was much stronger. Christina fought as hard as she could, kicking and trying to break free, but Vincent managed to get her into the back seat of his car. He got in beside her and pulled out a roll of duct tape from his jacket. What happened over the next several hours is known from Vincent's eventual confession and forensic evidence. Vincent drove Christina to a remote wooded area about 20 miles outside of Richmond. During the drive, Christina begged Vincent to let her go, promising she wouldn't tell anyone what had happened. Vincent told her that it was too late for that she had humiliated him at work and ruined his reputation. When they arrived at the remote location, Vincent parked the car and turned off the engine. He told Christina that if she had just given him a chance, none of this would have happened. He blamed her for everything. For his warning at work, for his damaged reputation, for his feelings of rejection and humiliation. Christina continued to plead with Vincent, trying to reason with him. She apologized if she had hurt his feelings and said that she just wanted to go home. For a moment, Vincent seemed to soften. However, his mood quickly shifted again. He became enraged, accusing Christina of lying and manipulating him. Vincent attacked Christina in the back seat of the car. She fought back desperately, scratching his face and arms, but Vincent overpowered her. He strangled Christina until she lost consciousness. When he realized what he had done, Vincent panicked. He checked for a pulse and found that Christina was dead. Vincent sat in the car for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Eventually, He carried Christina's body into the woods and buried her in a shallow grave. He dug with a shovel he had in his trunk. He then drove back to Richmond, stopping at a car wash to clean his vehicle. He arrived home around 11 p.m. and tried to act as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, when Christina didn't arrive at her parents' house by 7 p.m., Susan Hayes became worried. She tried calling Christina's cell phone multiple times, but it went straight to voicemail. By 8 p.m., both Susan and Robert were extremely concerned. They drove to Christina's apartment, but she wasn't there, and her car was not in the parking lot. Robert decided to drive along the route Christina would have taken from her office to their house, thinking perhaps she had car trouble. At around 8:45 p.m., he found Christina's red Ford Focus crashed into a telephone pole on Harrison Street. The driver's side door was open, the airbag was deployed, and there was blood on the side window. But Christina was nowhere to be found. Robert immediately called 911. Police and emergency responders arrived within minutes. The scene was secured, and investigators began processing the evidence. Blood evidence was collected from the car, and investigators noted that it appeared someone had forcibly removed the driver from the vehicle. The driver's seatbelt had been cut, and there were signs of a struggle. Witnesses in the area were interviewed, and one person reported seeing a dark blue sedan near the scene around the time of the crash. However, the witness had not gotten a clear look at the driver or the license plate. Christina was reported missing, and police began investigating her disappearance. Detectives went to Sterling Marketing Group on Saturday morning to interview Christina's co-workers and supervisors. Nancy Williams immediately told investigators about Vincent Palmer's obsessive behavior toward Christina and the incidents that had been reported to HR. Detective James Morrison, who was leading the investigation, immediately identified Vincent as a person of interest. Police went to Vincent's apartment on Saturday afternoon. Vincent answered the door and appeared surprised to see the police. He had fresh scratches on his face and neck, which he claimed were from his cat. Detective Morrison asked Vincent about his whereabouts on Friday evening. Vincent said he had left work at his usual time, around 5 p.m., stopped at a grocery store, and then gone home for the evening. He claimed he had been home alone all night and knew nothing about Christina's disappearance. However, when detectives asked to see Vincent's car, he became nervous and said his car was at a repair shop. When asked which repair shop, Vincent provided vague answers. Detective Morrison's suspicions intensified, and he requested permission to search Vincent's apartment. Vincent refused and asked the detectives to leave. Detective Morrison obtained a search warrant for Vincent's apartment and vehicle. On Sunday, November 16th, the warrant was executed. In Vincent's apartment, investigators found disturbing evidence. A box containing photos of Christina, many of which appeared to have been taken without her knowledge. There were photos of her leaving work, at restaurants, and even near her apartment. The box also contained a journal where Vincent had written extensively about Christina, expressing his obsession and anger at her rejection. Most significantly, investigators found blood evidence on a pair of shoes in Vincent's closet. The blood was later confirmed to match Christina's DNA. They also found the note that had been left on Christina's windshield. Vincent had apparently made multiple copies and kept one in his apartment. Vincent's car, a dark blue Honda Accord, was located at his apartment complex. Forensic examination revealed blood evidence in the back seat and trunk that matched Christina's DNA. There were also fibers from Christina's clothing found throughout the vehicle. Confronted with this overwhelming evidence, Vincent was arrested on Sunday evening and charged with kidnapping. At that point, Christina's body had not yet been found, but investigators strongly suspected she was dead. On Monday, November 17th, Detective Morrison conducted an intense interrogation of Vincent. Initially, Vincent denied any involvement in Christina's disappearance. However, as the detective presented the evidence, the photos, the journal, the blood evidence, the witness who had seen his car, Vincent's resolve began to crumble. After several hours, Vincent finally confessed. He told detectives what had happened on Friday evening and led them to the remote location where he had buried Christina's body. On Tuesday, November 18th, Christina's remains were recovered from the shallow grave in the woods. The news of Christina's death devastated her family. Susan Hayes collapsed when she heard the news and had to be hospitalized for shock. Robert Hayes was consumed by grief and guilt, wishing he had done more to protect his daughter. The entire Hayes family struggled to comprehend how this tragedy had occurred. The medical examiner confirmed that Christina had died from asphyxiation due to strangulation. She had also suffered blunt force trauma to the head from the car accident and had numerous defensive wounds on her hands and arms, indicating she had fought desperately for her life. Vincent Palmer's trial began in May 2004. The prosecution presented the overwhelming physical evidence, Vincent's confession, and testimony from Christina's co-workers about his obsessive and threatening behavior. They painted a picture of a man who had become dangerously fixated on Christina and who had ultimately killed her when she rejected his advances. The defense attempted to argue that Vincent had not intended to kill Christina, that her death had been an accident during a confrontation. However, the premeditation was evident. Vincent had followed Christina, forced her off the road, kidnapped her, and driven her to a remote location. The prosecution argued this clearly demonstrated intent. The trial lasted 2 weeks. On May 28, 2004, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and stalking. The jury found that Vincent had planned and executed Christina's murder with deliberation. On June 25, 2004, Vincent Palmer was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read, Christina's mother, Susan, wept openly, held by her husband, Robert. Robert stood and addressed the court, his voice breaking as he spoke about his daughter's kindness, talent, and the bright future that had been stolen from her. Vincent showed no emotion during the sentencing. His own family was not present in the courtroom. They had distanced themselves from him after learning the details of his crime. As he was led out in handcuffs, Vincent glanced back at the Hayes family, but quickly looked away. The death of Christina Hayes had a lasting impact on her family, friends, and workplace. Sterling Marketing Group implemented new security measures, including better lighting in the parking garage, security escorts for employees who worked late, and mandatory training on recognizing and reporting workplace harassment. Susan Hayes struggled with severe depression and anxiety, following Christina's death. She took a leave of absence from teaching and required extensive therapy. Robert Hayes became an advocate for workplace safety and stalking prevention, speaking publicly about Christina's case and urging companies to take threats seriously. Jennifer Mason, Christina's friend and co-worker, was deeply affected by the loss. She left Sterling Marketing Group shortly after Christina's death, unable to continue working there. She eventually became involved with a nonprofit organization that provides support to victims of stalking and workplace harassment. In 2005, the Virginia legislature passed stronger anti-stalking laws, partly in response to Christina's case. The legislation made it easier for victims to obtain protective orders and increase criminal penalties for stalking behavior. Advocates nicknamed it Christina's Law in her memory. Virginia Commonwealth University, Christina's alma mater, established the Christina Hayes Memorial Scholarship for graphic design students. The scholarship is awarded annually to a student who demonstrates both exceptional creative talent and a commitment to helping others. The Hayes family also established the Christina Hayes Foundation, which provides education about stalking and workplace harassment. The foundation offers training programs for companies and schools, helping people recognize warning signs and respond appropriately to concerning behavior. Vincent Palmer remains incarcerated at the Augusta Correctional Center in Virginia. He has never expressed genuine remorse for his actions and has filed multiple appeals, all of which have been denied. Prison records show that he has been a problematic inmate with multiple disciplinary infractions. Christina Hayes is remembered by her family, friends, and community as a talented artist, a kind soul, and a young woman whose life was cut tragically short by someone who could not accept rejection. Her death serves as a sobering reminder of the dangers of obsession and the importance of taking stalking behavior seriously, even in professional environments. Susan Hayes, who eventually found the strength to speak publicly about her daughter's case, said in a 2010 interview, "Christina just wanted to do her job and pursue her passion for art. She handled Vincent's attention appropriately. She was polite, but clear about her boundaries. She did everything right. But sometimes, even when you do everything right, dangerous people won't stop. That's why it's so important for companies, co-workers, and authorities to take these situations seriously before they escalate to violence." Christina's story continues to be used in workplace safety training programs across the country, helping others recognize the signs of dangerous obsession and potentially preventing similar tragedies. Her legacy lives on through the foundation that bears her name and the lives that have been saved by the awareness her story has brought to the issue of stalking. These stories serve as more than just tales of crime. They are reminders to cherish our loved ones, to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, and to speak up when we see concerning behavior. They remind us that violence can happen to anyone, regardless of background, education, or circumstance. And they show us the importance of supporting victims and taking threats seriously before it's too late. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, stalking, or feels unsafe in a relationship, please reach out for help. There are resources available, and you don't have to face these situations alone. Thank you for accompanying me through these difficult stories tonight. I hope they've given you something to think about as you drift off to sleep. If you found this content helpful for falling asleep, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you these stories. Until next time, stay safe, take care of each other, and remember, trust your instincts. They might just save your life or the life of someone you love. Good night, friends. Sleep well.